Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 651, Letter of Request for Mercy. Your Majesty. Seeing Viserys withdraw his gaze, the Pentus man standing in front of the desk on the other side was holding a large book with a bulging belly, flipping through the detailed data recorded on it, and then continued to speak. Your Majesty, the total amount of inflow and outflow of the port last month. Viserys was handling government affairs in King's Landing, while on the other side, far away at the northern gate of dawn in the southernmost part of Westeros, the falcon on the treetop watched the team transporting supplies go away, and then the grey-backed falcon flapped its wings, made a sharp cry, and fluttered its wings straight into the sky, heading in the direction where the team had just left. That night, the sky had just darkened. A team escorting supplies came along the road of the Prince's Pass towards this magnificent pass. They were under the banner of the Manwoody family of the King's Tomb City. The leader rode a warhorse, followed by a servant, and the remaining 20 soldiers escorted the caravan, holding a few dim torches in their hands. Open the gate. Then the convoy arrived at the gate behind the pass, and then the Dornish boy Karen stood in front and called for the door. Stop. Who are you? The Dornish soldiers on duty on the city wall with torches lit also saw the arrival of the convoy under the banner of the Manwoody family, but they still had to ask the other party's identity as a routine. It's your turn, Lord Dickon. Think about what you should say. Under the city wall of Prince's Pass, the fierce-looking Riverland knight standing next to the second son of the King's Tomb City lowered his voice and spoke in a threatening voice. At this moment, on the wall where the Dornish soldiers could not notice, the Riverland knight had already put a dagger against Dickon Manwoody's thigh. If he dared to talk nonsense, he would stab it with a knife and then turn around. Even if the King's soldiers might be wiped out, Dickon Manwoody would definitely die. Dickon cherished his life very much. Although he loved Dawn and his family, he loved his life more. Sitting on horseback, the second son of Hwang's City felt the dagger against his thigh, and even felt that the sharp tip of the dagger had pierced his pants and touched his flesh. His throat rolled slightly, and he felt a little warm in his lower body. He didn't want to say goodbye to his life as a man, and he didn't want to die, so he could only tremble, but pretend to be calm, and speak to the wall. It's me. Are you blind? You don't even recognize me? Dickon Manwoody raised his head while sitting on horseback. At this moment, the sky had darkened. Torches were lit on the top of the city, and the supply team under the city also lit a few torches, but the flames were very small, making it difficult for the soldiers on the top of the city to see clearly. However, the soldiers guarding the back door were very familiar with Dickon's voice. Hwang's City was not far from the Prince's Pass. The Manwoody family often passed by here. In addition, during this period, the Manwoody family also provided supplies to the defenders of the pass several times, most of which were personally escorted by Lord Dickon. It's Lord Dickon. Sorry. The soldiers on the top of the city heard Dickon Manwoody's voice, then held a torch and shone it down. They could barely see that it was Dickon under the city wall, so they waved to their colleagues behind them. Open the city. Since the identity was confirmed, the Dawn defenders did not doubt him and immediately lifted the bolt and pulled the hinge to open the city gate. After all, they did not receive any intelligence that the King's soldiers had crossed the Red Mountains and went around the back. The overall atmosphere was very relaxed. They did not think that there would be any problems. Everything was under control. Moreover, there were more than 2,000 Dawn soldiers stationed at Prince's Pass. Although there were 4,000 King's soldiers besieging Prince's Pass in front of the city gate on the other side, there were only 20 people in front of them. Even if they were really enemies, it would be too exaggerated to want to capture the city. They would have to kill 100 people by themselves. Does such a person exist? Of course not. Even if Sir Arthur Dayne, known as the Sword of the Dawn, was resurrected, he could not face 100 enemies at the same time. Therefore, the defenders on the city wall saw that it was Dickon Manwoody and had no vigilance at all. They opened the city gates and let these people enter the city. Franklin Fowler was a little uneasy. Since the only male of the Fowler family, his nephew, died in the river bay, he was overwhelmed by anger. He personally led the team to raid the castle of the Zenford family, but unfortunately he did not catch Earl Zenford and let him escape. He just took out his anger on his wife and children. However, when all these things were done, seeing the bodies of Mrs. Zenford and the children lying in a pool of blood, Franklin Fowler was completely awake, felt extremely regretful, and even couldn't help slapping himself a few times. Of course, he did not repent for attacking women and children. It was because he had touched the bottom line of the kingdom. Old Falcon Franklin Fowler had seen Viserys in person and even had a few simple words with him. He thought the young new king was a man who looked gentle on the surface, but was actually ruthless. At that time, Franklin participated in a series of activities in King's Landing as the Earl of Scion City, including the king's wedding, coronation ceremony, and subsequent public trial. He was deeply afraid of the young king's tactics. At the public trial, many nobles who were once powerful could not escape death, and even behaved in a very ugly way. Some cried, some kowtowed and begged for mercy, but in the end they could not escape punishment. Now that he has touched the bottom line of the kingdom's laws, he naturally couldn't help but think of the consequences of doing so. Although Dawn and the Reach had deep conflicts in the past, it was normal for the two sides to have border conflicts, but now the situation is different. Times have changed. The dim candlelight in the room swayed gently. The old falcon with grey hair rubbed his eyes in annoyance. He was old and his body was not working well. He felt his eyes were a little sore and his temples were swollen just thinking about things for a while. He was sitting in the room in the prince's pass. On the desk was a handwritten letter that he had just written. The signature was the motto of the Fowler family in Shianji City, "Let me fly," and the beginning of the address was the Martel family of Sunspear City, the feudal lord of the Fowler family. Prince Doran was the father-in-law of His Majesty the King, and the Martel family had a queen. Franklin Fowler didn't know why he was a little upset. He had begun to think about his way out, and decided to write a letter to Prince Doran, hoping that he could say a few good words to his son-in-law and spare his life. Chapter 652, Breaking Through the Prince's Pass. This was the only solution. After calming down, the Lord of Shianji City hoped that this matter could be resolved, but unfortunately, the nobles of the River Bay did not intend to let him go. The nobles of the River Bay were not stationed in front of the Prince's Pass in order to capture this pass. Only 2,000 people were not enough to shake this pass from the front, especially since there were also 2,000 people stationed in this pass. They just wanted to make a big splash in the event, so that everyone in the country would know about it. Then, the murderer Franklin Fowler would not be able to escape legal sanctions. Therefore, Earl Fowler had been actively running around after retreating to the Prince's Pass. One of them was to get in touch with the nobles of the River Bay, hoping to give out some of the benefits in exchange for everyone's forgiveness, but he was rejected. On the other hand, he also actively contacted other Dawn nobles to build momentum. The greater the momentum, the greater the chance of his survival. Just like those who borrowed a lot of money were all masters, and nothing would happen if they were recruited in the future. However, now he has started writing a letter begging for mercy, hoping that Prince Doran can look at their past and plead with His Majesty the King for him. In fact, since the outbreak of this incident, except for the letter that Prince Doran wrote to him to ask him what happened, the two have not exchanged any letters. Franklin Fowler is now without any confidence, and even in a state of panic. On the other hand, the king's soldiers who quietly infiltrated the Prince's Pass began a secret operation. The Dornish are divided into Salt people, Stone people and Sand people. Not all of them have the appearance of the Roina people. For example, the Stone people have fair skin and blue eyes. Among the king's soldiers, who have infiltrated the Prince's Pass, there are many soldiers and knights from the River Reach, as well as Roina warriors drawn from the 2nd Legion. They are mixed in the team, and become the most perfect cover. Except for the obvious loopholes in their accents, there are no other flaws. Therefore, the Dornish soldiers guarding the city let them in without any suspicion. After entering Prince's Pass, they had a place to rest. The members of the supply team would stay in these rooms and return to King's Tomb the next morning. The Knight of the Oakhead family watched Deacon Manwoody all the way, to prevent him from making any unusual moves. "What should we do next, sir?" At this time, one of the soldiers of the king's army looked at their commander, Sir Caswell. The knight of Bitterbridge looked thoughtful. He thought for a moment and then spoke. The king's hand asked us to set a big fire at Prince's Pass. In that case, let's find a place in the city where supplies are stored. If you want to set a big fire, kerosene is the most indispensable tool. Flame is a weapon of war. It is needed, whether it is siege or defense. Therefore, every city must have a storage of kerosene. According to general experience, most of these kerosene are stored together with military supplies. Once you find the warehouse of Prince's Pass, you can find kerosene, and then you can take the opportunity to set a big fire. In the king's camp in front of Prince's Pass, the night is shrouded, and the lights in the central army tent are still bright. As the commander of the entire army, John Clinton, the Prime Minister of the Iron Throne, has had some headaches recently, and the reason for his worry is naturally how to conquer Prince's Pass. He has 4,000 soldiers in his hands, and the Fowler family soldiers guarding the city also have 2,000. Although the soldiers of the Kingdom Army are more than twice the enemy has the advantage of defending the city after all. If you force the attack on Prince's Pass, you may not be able to attack it at a great cost. However, this matter cannot be delayed. After all, this matter was originally requested by himself, and there will be changes on the battlefield. The longer it is delayed, the less you know what will happen. He hoped that the 50 warriors sent out at the beginning could successfully implement the surprise attack plan, but so many days have passed, and there is still no news. Even though John Connington had full confidence in this plan, he couldn't help but wonder if it had failed. These 50 soldiers had already been killed in Dawn, and some had even been beheaded and put on the city wall for demonstration. However, John Connington ran to the Prince's Pass every now and then to look around, but he didn't see any new heads cut off, which gave him a little hope for the success of the plan. But at this time, my lord, the commanders in the central army tent were discussing the strategy of breaking the city. Suddenly, there were hurried shouts and footsteps outside. One of the Prime Minister's guards, John Broad from King's Landing, hurried in and said loudly, "My lord, go outside and take a look. There seems to be a big fire in the Prince's Pass." What? The guard's words instantly ignited all the generals and commanders in the central army tent, and they all rushed to the outside of the tent. Then, as expected, a huge fire was burning in the ancient pass in the distance. The flames illuminated the sky and thick smoke was constantly spreading. They succeeded. The plan was successful. The nobles of the Reach and the commanders of the 2nd Legion were all talking about it, and the grey red-haired man couldn't help but clench his fists slightly, then turned around and spoke loudly. "Come on. Prepare to attack the city." A huge fire was burning in the Prince's Pass, and the king's soldiers had been blocked outside the pass for more than half a month, since the arrival of reinforcement. Kill. Then, under the order of the commander-in-chief, the king's hand John Clinton, the king's soldiers launched a fierce attack on the Prince's Pass. The Dawn soldiers in the city were panicked. On the one hand, they tried to extinguish the burning flames, and on the other hand, they had to defend against the king's army's siege. The command system of the Dawn army was completely in chaos. The soldiers could not find the generals, and the generals could not find the soldiers. At the same time, the ruthless fire was constantly devouring fresh lives. The war lasted a whole night, and ended when the sky cleared up. The soldiers of the king's army entered the Prince's Pass, and the defenders in the city were killed, wounded, and surrendered. The old falconer, Earl Franklin Fowler, who served as the guardian of the pass, realized that something was wrong, and fled to his hometown, Cheyenne City. Chapter 653 Visit to Me. Splash. The waves on the sea surface were calm, and a fleet full of crew members and cargo pushed away the sea water and sailed quietly in the huge and gentle Me Sea. A woman with short black hair and slender legs stood at the bow, and the gentle sea breeze caressed her cheeks and lifted her hair. "Miss Mir is almost here." At this time, a Nineborn came to report, and the black-haired woman standing on the bow with one foot on the box came back to her senses slightly. She raised her head and looked into the distance, where there was a faint shadow of a city. Then the woman nodded and said, without saying anything more, but turned and walked towards the cabin below the deck. This woman wearing black leather armor and a scimitar tied around her waist was Asher Greyjoy, who was responsible for an important mission and led the troops on this trip to North Island. She was called the daughter of the sea monster. Asha was wearing tight leather armor, highlighting her exquisite figure. With a scimitar on her waist, she hurried into the cabin. Most of the candidates she selected for this trip were the iron races left by her father, and the rest were the kingdom navy trained by the kingdom's minister of the sea, Riverland Governor Jeffrey Bracken. The fleet for this long journey consisted of 3 main ships and a large number of escort boats. Soon after, the sound of horns suddenly came from the sea. It turned out that the Mii fleet had discovered the traces of the kingdom navy. They held high the flag of the 3-headed dragon of the Targaryen family and could be seen from a long distance. However, the Mii fleet did not panic because Asha Greyjoy had already sent a message to me through Pentis Governor Bessie Joyce when she led the fleet to Mirror's the first stop. After leaving King's Landing, Asha Greyjoy's fleet first crossed the narrow sea to Pentis for repairs, and also brought Viserys' handwritten instructions. The general guarding the other side of the narrow sea was already famous in the free trade city. Saint Ironface Bessie Joyce was the first King's Guard to follow Viserys. Now he also serves as the captain of the King's Guard, although he has long stopped working as a senior bodyguard and has transformed into a general. Everyone believes that it was the fire that year. Bessie rushed into the sea of fire and suffered severe burns all over her body and lost the ability to fight with a sword. That's why she left Viserys and learned slowly with her perseverance and eventually became a general. And to this day, this commander who wears a metal mask all day is actually powerless. But what they don't know is that Bessie actually recovered a long time ago, and even his combat power is several times stronger than his peak period, becoming unfathomable. He can face dozens of his personal guards at the same time, and then knock them down one by one with a wooden sword. However, this is not his limit, and now Bessie doesn't know where his limit is. He only knew that, since His Majesty the King injected a special black gas into his forehead, his body has been getting worse and worse. From the beginning, the burns on his body gradually recovered, he could hold the hilt of the sword again, and later he could walk independently without crutches. However, now the black mist in his body has gradually grown, but Bessie himself cannot see it. He only knows that his body has completely surpassed the past. His physical fitness, strength, and power have doubled, and even his mind is much clearer than before. Some problems that he couldn't understand before can now be solved with just a little thought. However, although his body has undergone earth-shaking changes, he did not expose the changes in his body now, but still maintained his previous appearance, continuing to hide his light, making people feel that he is still that fragile. But in fact, looking at the entire army, even in Pentis, he feels that the chief swordsman of Bravos may not be his opponent. Bessie certainly knows that all his changes now come from the gift of His Majesty the King. In addition to deepening his inner awe, his loyalty is not shaken at all. Without Viserys, he is still that ordinary cowherd boy. When Bessie was alone guarding Pentis and Indolus, many forces had contacted him openly or secretly, hoping that he could stab his king in the back, or even simply expressed their willingness to support his independence and cut off Viserys' logistical supply sources. Some also hoped to buy a baby dragon at a high price. However, all these were strongly rejected by Bessie. Fame, wealth, and beauty tricks were useless to him. He just firmly believed in his beliefs, which made many people who wanted to make trouble and stab Viserys in the back scold the other party for being stupid. But it was Bessie's stupidity that made Viserys dare to use him to guard the rear. There were many such people in his camp, such as his Prime Minister John Clinton, and Eddard Stark, who was exiled to the border. Welcome the fleet of the Empire to visit me, my lord. The fleet with the 3-headed dragon flag of the Targaryen family docked in the port of Mie. A trembling old man with grey hair stood in front of the port. He didn't know how long he had been waiting. His bald head was covered with dense beads of sweat. He saw someone coming down from the fleet. Before he could see what the person looked like, he bowed down and saluted, and said at the same time, "Welcome the envoy of the Empire to visit me." The many followers behind the old man also bowed and saluted. Mie, now this prosperous and magnificent city-state known for its handicraft industry in the past, has regained new life after suffering a devastating blow. The people who survived by chance and the Mie people from all over the world returned to rebuild their homes. However, after the initial unity of the people, the reconstruction of Mir also gradually exposed some problems. Volantis, Lies, and Tirosh are all trading cities around me and are deeply affected by geopolitical factors. Since me was destroyed by the iron hoofs of the Dothraki, they have all reached out to this city-state that is in mourning. They all supported a representative with interests in me, calling themselves the governor of me, but in fact they are all lackeys who run errands for their respective city-states. Asha Greyjoy had done her homework on these things before coming to me. Viserys explained to her the importance of this mission, and she also wanted to prove her ability in front of the Iron Throne. In this era, as a woman, she also has the ability to stand on her own. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 654 Three Governors. Governor Morse. Asha Greyjoy looked at the white-haired old man in front of her. According to the intelligence she had collected in Pentis in advance, the other party was a wealthy businessman who traveled back and forth between Mir and Volantis for business. When Me was destroyed, his fleet had just left the port, and he had escaped by chance. Later, Morse was found by the Volantis, and helped him return to Me. Now he has become the representative of the interests of the Volantis. He donated a lot of money to restore the construction of his hometown, so he also called himself the governor. It was for this reason that Asha called him Governor Morse. Humph, the lackey of the Volantis dares to call himself the governor. At this time, a young man in gorgeous clothes at the port of Misi also came over with a group of followers. He spoke sarcastically to Governor Morse without any hesitation. You. The old governor, who was trembling just now, changed his face, stopped his waist, and was about to refute, and another group of people rushed over from another direction. Welcome to Me, the messenger of the true dragon. This time it was a middle-aged man wearing a light yellow robe, with various gem rings on his fingers and two small mustaches above his lips. I'm sorry to make you laugh. His face was calm, and he ignored the conflict between the other two. He looked at Asher and the Iron Race and naval soldiers behind him and then spoke. The Empire's navy is magnificent and amazing. In fact, strictly speaking, Valyria is not an empire, but a special political system like the Freehold. It is only because of the country's strong strength, vast land area, huge population, and multiple ethnic groups that it is generally called an empire. The 40 families of Valyria jointly elected the ruler, which is a bit like the seeking of Bravos. Once elected, they will serve for life. The Targaryen family has never been involved in the title of the co-ruler because of its weak strength. However, after the collapse of the Valyrian Empire, a Valyrian emperor was born. Dragon King Orion is one of the few surviving Dragon Kings. He recruited troops in Koha and proclaimed himself the Emperor of Valyria. Then he rode a dragon and led 30,000 infantrymen to the ruins of Valyria, intending to rebuild the Freehold, but since then no one has seen His Majesty Orion and his army. Although Viserys was first crowned on Dragonstone when he was 7 or 8 years old, he has had several coronation ceremonies of various sizes in his life. Because he expanded the territory of the kingdom and reached the other side of the Narrow Sea, he actually has the title of Prince of Pentos and Indolus, but it is rarely mentioned. Nowadays, the entire Westeros and even the land across the Narrow Sea have always been promoting a concept, that is, everyone is a unified country. Even now, the definition of which is the capital between King's Landing and Pentos has not been implemented in law, but Viserys has been living in King's Landing in recent years. Viserys never claimed that he was crowned as the emperor, but the outside world generally regarded him as the emperor and called Westeros and the kingdom of Andalus and Pentos merged as the empire. My name is Salad Hassan, a mercenary captain. My father is from Me and my mother is from Lies. I'm now one of the governors of Me. The middle-aged man in a light yellow robe, with slightly dark skin and 10 rings on his hands, raised his head and chest and spoke. To be honest, the messenger of the true dragon, Me now has 3 governors, and the 3 of us each represent the support of a force. Governor Morse is a spice merchant operating in Volantis, and now represents the interests of Volantis in Me, Salad Hassan said, and then he and Asher turned their heads to look at the white-haired old man who spoke at the beginning. Although Governor Morse looked a little unhappy when he heard the words, he still nodded. and standing behind this young Lord Governor Orton addresses Tirosh. He is an acquaintance. During the War of the Nine Copper Kings, Silver-Tongue Akudo Adris once ruled Tirosh. After the defeat in the war, Akudo ruled Tirosh for another 6 years. He was then poisoned, and the Lord of Tirosh was restored. And Lord Governor Orton Adris is the youngest son of Silver-Tongue. As for me, as I just introduced myself to the envoy, my father is Amir and my mother is Eliz. You know that Liz is rich in prostitutes. I grew up in my mother's cottage and helped her entertain guests. Later, when I grew up, I started to go to sea and had my own fleet. Therefore, Liz supported me and let me stand here. What a coincidence. I wonder if the envoy knows Davos Seaworth. He seems to be called the Onion Knight now. I heard that he works in the customs department of King's Landing. We are old friends. Salado-san spoke freely and exposed the true colors of several current governors of Mie, including himself, without hiding his humble origins. On the other side, the young governor in gorgeous clothes also looked a little ugly and couldn't help but speak directly and sarcastically. Salada, you are a bastard raised by a whore. You have no right to stand with us. What do you mean you started to go to sea when you grew up and later had a fleet? You might as well just say you are a pirate. Orton Adris directly exposed Salada's beautified nature, but Salada-san was not angry, just shrugged his shoulders slightly. TSK, you are worthy of being the son of Silver-Tongue, Orton. You have a poisonous mouth. The young governor who relied on Tirosh's support was very poisonous. He just stood here for a while and mocked the two current governors of Mie one after another. Mie has always been a system of the governor's council, so it is not surprising that there are 3 governors now. On the surface, these 3 people are fighting fiercely, but in fact they tacitly work together to exclude other people who want to become governors. Asha with short black hair calmly watched them quarreling, recalling the information she had collected about the current situation of Mir in Pentus. After the reconstruction, Mie has 3 governors, who come from Volantis, Liz and Tirosh, a spice merchant, a tyrant's descendant, and a pirate. Asha suddenly felt that this trip seemed to become interesting. Chapter 655 Night Visit. The kingdom's navy was stationed in the port of the Mie Sea, and Asha Greyjoy led a few followers to temporarily live in Mie City. This is a city that was reborn in destruction, so the traces of the war can still be seen everywhere in Mie City today. Half of the collapsed tower, the broken palace that has not been repaired, and the traces of fire, and in the center of the city is a huge stone monument standing tall. This is to commemorate the catastrophe a few years ago. Hundreds of thousands of Mie people were buried under the butcher's knife of the Dothraki. The person who spoke was Governor Morse, the spice merchant from Volantis who first met Asha. The remaining 2 governors, Orton Adris, the son of Silver-Tongue, one of the 9 Copper Kings, and the pirate Salada-san, who proclaimed himself the Prince of the Narrow Sea, left after meeting the Imperial envoy. Orton wanted to see who had defeated his father, but unfortunately he later learned that the young knight Barristan Selmy, who had ended the War of the 9 Copper Kings or the 5th Blackfire Rebellion, had been betrayed by his white brothers in Riverrun and died from a stab wound to the throat. The rest of them, Stefan Baratheon, Tywin Lannister and Aerys, who had shone on the battlefield, had all passed away. As for the other pirate, Salada Thornton, who claimed to be a friend of the Onion Knight, his purpose was unknown. In the end, he smiled at Asha Greyjoy and told her that, if she was tired of Morse, she could come and live with him. Salada Thornton wore 10 rings on his hands, shining brightly, and he didn't even look like a pirate, but an Alvorish. However, the messenger sent by Pentus to contact Mir about this diplomatic matter was Morse, the spice merchant, so Asha and others were considered Morse's guests, and should have been entertained by him. Well, I know about this past, Lord Governor Morse. As an envoy, I express condolences to Mir on behalf of the Iron Throne. As murderers, the Dothraki should bear the consequences. The envoy of the Iron Throne, Asha Greyjoy, rode a warhorse, while the Spice Governor Morse sat in a sedan chair, opened the curtain, and introduced the city to her. The elderly spice merchant was no longer able to ride a horse. He invited Asha to get into his carriage but was rejected. Asha had never made a sedan chair since she was a child. In her opinion, only people without legs needed a sedan chair, and she didn't want to stay with an old man with all his teeth gone. And there was nothing wrong with Asha's statement, because the Dothraki who massacred Mir and the Dothraki who surrendered to the Targaryen family were not the same group of people. The Dothraki who surrendered to the Targaryen family were the ones who were captured on the front battlefield, while the tribes that attacked me later fled from Pentis in a hurry. In the end, they were unwilling to gain nothing from this eastward advance, so several Khals joined forces and suddenly attacked me. Then the sound of horses' hooves hitting the ground was loud, and the wheels rolled. A group of people passed through the streets of Mir. The governor's convoy was accompanied by the guards of Governor Moors and the Tiger Cloak army from Volantis. And Asha Greyjoy brought several loyal Ironborn and envoys from the island of Narth. The Ironborn wore leather armor, scimitars on their waists, and their faces were full of ferocity. The young woman wore a black cloak, leather armor inlaid with gold edges, and shiny boots. The sound of horses' hooves was loud, and a group of people passed through the streets. The people and slaves of Mir avoided them, and cast curious eyes, because they saw the two flags held by the Ironborn. One was the three-headed dragon flag of the Targaryen family, and the other was the golden sea monster flag symbolizing the Greyjoy family. Asha Greyjoy stayed temporarily in the manor of Governor Morse. She would stay in me for only about a week, before setting off for Tarosh. However, someone came to the door that night. Bang, there was a sudden noise outside the door. Asha Greyjoy, who was sleeping, opened her eyes instantly, and her palm had touched the dagger hidden under the pillow. Because she was in a foreign country, Asha didn't even take off her leather armor when she slept, but only took off her cloak. Then the woman with short black hair got up from the bed nimbly, and held the dagger in her hand tightly. Asha is different from ordinary women. She doesn't like long red dresses but prefers knives, spears, and long swords. This is the same as Brienne of Tarth and the little wolf girl Arya Stark, who she met before fighting. Arya, who was now temporarily living in King's Landing, often went to ask Maya, a member of the King's Guard, for swordsmanship. The female mercenary who had once been in Volantis was naturally no ordinary person. She was one of the top killers there, and had once broken the sword of Barristan Selmy, which became a legend. Now there was a slight noise outside the door, and Asha Greyjoy had already reacted. She clenched the dagger in her hand, and looked out the door with a sharp gaze. At this moment, the door of her room opened. A burly man in a black robe and a hood stood outside the door, and beside him was an Ironborn guarding the door. Don't worry, he just fainted. The man was not surprised to see that Asha had woken up. He looked down at the Ironborn, who was knocked unconscious by him, shrugged his shoulders, and then spoke. But Asha frowned slightly when she heard his accent. This accent gave her a very familiar feeling. You are. The woman with short black hair seemed very calm. She didn't feel the slightest panic when a strange man broke into the room. Instead, she calmly asked the other person's name. The man in black opposite did not hesitate and took off his hood to reveal a slightly dark face. He was the pirate governor, Saladin, who had talked with Asha during the day. He had taken off the exaggerated rings on his 10 fingers, black bandages were wrapped around his wrists, and a scimitar was hung around his waist. I haven't fought for a long time, and I'm a little rusty. Saladin moved his shoulders and then spoke. When he was young, he was a top pirate galloping in the narrow sea. Many caravans were terrified. If he only dealt with this little guy, he should not be able to make any sound, but unfortunately his skills are not as good as they were in the past. Don't panic, envoy. I came to you in the middle of the night without any bad intentions. I just want to talk to you about something that is not convenient for others to know. Chapter 656, Empire Support. Oh, what do you want to talk about? If it was someone else, they would have shouted for the guards to come over, or chased him out, but the women of the Iron Islands were naturally not ordinary. Clang, Asha heard his words, but instead of chasing him out, she put the dagger back into the sheath, pinned it to the tight leather pants at her waist, then crossed her legs and spoke with interest. I hope to get the support of the Empire. The dark-skinned pirate Governor Saladin said without hesitation. The support of the Empire? Asha narrowed her eyes slightly when she heard the words. Yes, I want to become the unique governor of Mir and kill Morse and Orton Adris. Then the pirate Governor Saladin directly revealed his ambition without any disguise. Saladin was born in a humble family. His mother was a waitress in a tavern. His father made his mother pregnant and abandoned her. Then, due to the need to make a living, Salada's mother became a bed slave until she died. Salado remembered that, when he was a child, his family didn't even have a pair of decent shoes. He had to run around barefoot on the floor all day, eat food that others couldn't swallow, and flies and mosquitoes were flying everywhere. Therefore, Salado-san's biggest dream in this life was to kill his irresponsible father and change the fate of himself and his descendants. However, the former is already difficult to achieve. Salado's mother had died of illness when he went to sea many years ago, and he didn't know who his father was. As for the latter, this is exactly the dream that this great pirate who galloped across the narrow sea and the summer sea has been pursuing. He hopes to change his fate, and he hopes that his descendants will not have to endure the suffering he has suffered. At first, Salado thought that he only needed to get enough money, but when he slowly robbed a lot of money, he realized that the opportunity to change his fate was not the amount of money, but the change of identity. As a pirate, don't expect others to look up to you for your whole life. No matter how much money he robbed, and how many merchants he frightened, he couldn't change this. Even the city was not easy to get into, because there were wanted notices for him everywhere. Especially when he heard that his friend Davos Seaworth, who used to be a smuggler, had quit smuggling and became the Earl of Rainwood. Later, he became Stannis's top confidant, and now, after the country was pacified, he became the extremely lucrative customs chief. The reputation of Davos Seaworth as a smuggler has gradually disappeared, and even the Onion Knight has become a good story in Westeros. Davos relied on his own transformation and embarked on the right path. It is almost foreseeable that in a few years, the name of the Onion Knight will no longer be mentioned. Even when his son inherits his family business, the Seaworth family will become a real noble, not a smuggler's son. With such a vivid example in front of him, his friend turned into a noble, so Salado-san gradually began to be tempted, wanting to join a strong and stable force to change himself and the fate of his descendants. He is now at an age where he must consider these things. For this reason, when the Governor's Council of Lies found Salado-san, he agreed at once. The Governor Council of Lies hoped that he could return to Mir as a wandering Mia and become the spokesperson for Lies' interests. In return, Lies would support him to become the governor of Mia. Salado heard this and agreed without any hesitation. But after arriving in Mia, Salado found that everything was different from what the Lies people promised him. First of all, he was not the only one who had the final say. There were also Governor Moors, the spokesperson of Volantis, and Orton Adris, the spokesperson of the Lord of Tirosh. Moreover, he was not free to do whatever he wanted in Mia. He did not look like a governor at all, and was constrained by the Lies people everywhere. The other two governors would always trip him up in secret. Salado, who was born as a pirate, was proficient in fighting, and could kill people with a knife, but he was not good at cutting meat with a soft knife in politics and business. Although he led a pirate group that roamed the sea, he could not kill those two people easily. Because Governor Moors and Orton Adris also have the tiger cloaks and Tirosh unsullied guards, and even if he kills them, Salado-san cannot defend Mia, because the Lies people will not allow him to do it, which will provoke the hostility of Volantis and Tirosh towards Lies, and even trigger a war. The Lies people are not capable of facing these two powerful enemies at the same time, so if Salado-san takes the initiative to eliminate the other two governors of Mia, it is very likely that he will be surrounded by the combined armies of Volantis, Lies and Tirosh. Therefore, although on the surface he is in a prosperous situation and has a group of brothers to protect him when he goes out on weekdays, in fact, Salado has been living a very depressed life in Mir until the envoy of the Iron Throne arrives, and there are 2,000 elite naval soldiers stationed in the port. Salado is not convenient to discuss these with Asher in detail during the day, because there are many spies beside him, but at night he changes into night clothes and sneaks into Governor Moore's manor in person. Governor Moore's own room was heavily guarded, and Salado could not sneak in. The Imperial envoys lived outside the manor, and only used their own people for protection, so Salado sneaked in. I'm willing to seize me for your majesty, and there is only one condition, that is, to appoint me as the governor of Mia. Then Salado-san continued to speak. Of course, if your majesty cares about your face, and does not want to obtain Mia, then I'm willing to become the spokesperson for the interests of the Iron Throne, deliver benefits to the Empire, and swear allegiance to your majesty forever. In short, Saladin now wants to seize Mie and become the Prince of Mie. He has a group of pirates who are good at fighting and may have the ability to take action, but he lacks someone to support him behind the scenes. He does not need the Imperial Navy to help him attack the guards of the other two governors, just need them to stand there and not interfere. Moreover, if Viserys wants to obtain Mie will become part of the Empire's territory. If Viserys takes his international reputation into consideration, then Saladin will become the Iron Throne's spokesperson in Mie, just like his previous job, and deliver tangible benefits to the Iron Throne. Who doesn't like gold? Mie is actually still under Viserys, but is independent in name only. On the other side, Asha Greyjoy, who was sitting by the window with her legs crossed, fell into deep thought after hearing his words. Chapter 657, Request. The pirate governor Saladin hopes to get the support of the Iron Throne, but Asha cannot decide this issue by herself. She needs to ask Viserys for instructions. Fortunately, the fleet is not too far away from King's Landing now, and it is only separated by a narrow sea. If the fleet goes to farther places, such as Volantis, the Land of Long Summer, Mataris along the Demon Road, Slavers Bay, etc., then Asha will have to make all the decisions independently. Moreover, when reaching the end of the world, the influence of the Iron Throne on the other side will be reduced to the weakest, unlike the trading city-states, which are intimidated by the huge empire next to them. The great lords and good lords of Slavers Bay may not sell the face of the empire thousands of miles away, because they know that, even if they offend the other party, the empire will not send a powerful army to expedition to Slavers Bay from afar, and the cost paid is not proportional to the benefits gained. If the Iron Throne really launched such a war crazily, perhaps the huge consumption and cost would be enough to drag down the entire country. After a moment of silence, Asha said that she needed to consult the Iron Throne. The pirate governor Saladin also expressed his understanding. After all, this matter was of great importance and naturally it was not something that an envoy could agree to. Then the pirate governor quietly left the mansion of Governor Morse, as if he had never appeared. Asha sat on the bed and pondered for a moment, then called someone to ask them to drag the Iron brothers at the door away and wake them up. He was indeed knocked unconscious by Saladin's sudden jump from the eaves, but he was not seriously injured. However, the Ironborn who followed Asha into Mie City were shocked and angry. Who did this? They did not expect that someone would approach their princess quietly. Fortunately, Asha was not seriously injured. These Ironborn who were once loyal to Asha's father, King Balon Greyjoy, still regarded Asha as their princess and Theon as their prince. Because before the Iron Islands were attacked by the White Walkers, Balon Greyjoy had once again worn the driftwood crown and became king in the Iron Islands. But it was a pity that King Balon had not yet completed his mission, restored the ancient road, and invaded the Greenland before he was attacked by the White Walkers who came by boat and entered the Black Tide Island. He once sent his third brother Victarion to the Black Tide Island to find out the truth, but Victarion never returned, and his life or death was unknown. Then the White Walkers invaded Pike Island, and the Iron races were almost all extinct. Only a few Iron races, led by Asha, fought desperately and escaped by boat. However, facing the shocked and angry Iron races, Asha seemed very calm. After thinking for a moment, she told all the trusted Iron races not to make a fuss about this matter and just pretend that nothing happened. The next morning, Asha Greyjoy went to the newly built governor's mansion in Mie as usual. It was built on the ruins of the old palace. The whole city alternated between the old and the new, and it was very magical realism. The broken ruins and the emerging buildings blended together. Standing on the street, you can take these two scenes into your eyes. She bought the most distinctive mirai in the Mie market, which is a monocular telescope. This is a treasure that every navigator dreams of. The better the quality, the more precious it is. Asha is no exception. Moreover, her fleet will need to bypass the riot zone of the Smoke Sea and the Land of Long Summer and cross the deep sea of the Sea of Midsummer. Naturally, she needs a good tool to assist her. Mie is rich in all kinds of lace, carvings, screens, paintings, and carpets, which are exported to foreign city-states in large quantities. Even Mie's excellent glass panes can be as expensive as spices from the east. These things were originally thought to disappear with the destruction of Mie, but unexpectedly they have revived. After Asha formally visited the three Mii governors and left the governor's mansion, she came to the market. At the same time, a fast horse carried her handwritten letter to Pentus. Pentus also has a prince's palace, which once belonged to the Tattered Prince. However, the Tattered Prince intended to rebel and seek independence during the riots many years ago, but he didn't know that he had already been targeted by the spies of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He was killed on the street as soon as he walked out of the gate of the prince's palace. Since then, the prince's palace has been idle and eventually became the office of Pentus Governor Iron Face Bessie Joyce. A few days later, Asha Greyjoy's secret letter was delivered to Pentus, and the messenger she sent walked into the prince's palace under the guidance of the guards. Commander-in-Chief. The guards of the prince's palace are all professional soldiers, the personal guards of the Commander-in-Chief of the 1st Legion. Bessie is a low-key person who rarely goes out, so few people can see him. The sound of footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. As soon as the Ironborn messenger walked into the gloomy hall, he saw the man sitting on the throne. He couldn't help holding his breath, and then took a deep breath. Because the other party's aura was too strong, it made him a little timid. The first thing he saw when he walked into the hall was a cold iron mask facing him. The windows on both sides of the hall shone slanting sunlight, which sprinkled on the ground and stone pillars. The burly man sitting on the throne wore a cold iron mask, and the eyes under the iron mask were not very clear because of the light. What's the matter? The hall was empty, with only the man wearing the iron mask sitting on the throne. Then a calm voice came from under the iron mask. His voice was not hoarse as rumored because of the damage to the vocal cords caused by inhaling too much smoke, but surprisingly very pleasant. My lord. This ironborn man who looked unruly with his arms and breasts exposed unexpectedly became much more low-key in front of Bessie. He bowed deeply, then took out the handwritten letter from the Princess of the Iron Islands and handed it to the guard beside him, who passed it on. However, when Asha Greyjoy's handwritten letter was handed over, Bessie read it all and put the letter back on the armrest beside her. No expression could be seen on the cold iron face. Retreat. Sir? The Ironborn who delivered the message was a little confused. He didn't know what was written in the letter. But since this mysterious governor who didn't even show his face ordered them to retreat, the Ironborn naturally didn't dare to stay. He could only bow again and retreat. On the other side, the Commander-in-Chief's guards heard Bessie's order and retreated without hesitation, then pushed open the door of the hall and walked out. Chapter 658 Acquiescence. However, when everyone left the prince's hall, the man sitting on the throne in the middle slowly raised his right hand. Because he had been severely burned, he rarely showed his skin in front of outsiders, whether in winter or summer. Bessie had kept this habit for a long time. He always had an iron mask on his face and never took it off. Few people remembered what he looked like, and his clothes were very thick, not revealing an inch of skin. But at this moment, his palm stretched out from the white sleeves of his robe, and it was as pure as white jade, without any trace of burns, let alone the charred black. Then a ball of black mist slowly rose from the palm of his hand. He could not see the black mist hidden in his body, but he could stimulate it. He knew that this was the source of his power, and it was also the seed given to him by his majesty. With this seed, he could take root and sprout, and gradually grow strong. On the other side of the narrow sea, it was afternoon in Pentus, but Viserys had just had lunch in the Red Castle. The family finished lunch, and Arianne took their daughter Diana to take a nap. The child is now in the period of growth, and there is no concept of day and night. She can sleep whenever she wants. After lunch, Daenerys ran out to play with her best friend Miss Andy. They will go to the academy together in the afternoon. Daenerys is interested in medicine. She and the fat boy Samwell Tarly learned medical knowledge from the great physician Ambrose, while Miss Andy is more interested in the liberal arts department. She has a high talent for language, mainly due to her excellent memory. She can remember many things she has seen. Viserys can see that Miss Andy's mental power is indeed stronger than ordinary people. Perhaps this is her unique talent. If she grew up in Westeros, she would probably be regarded as a candidate for the three-eyed raven like Brandon. However, Brandon is the mysterious blood of the Stark family. He is a wolf spirit. The blood of the Stark family is all wolf spirits, but there is still a difference in the strength of mental power. Perhaps Brandon still has an advantage over Miss Andy. The girl from Nars Island chose to study economics, perhaps because she was afraid of poverty when she was young. Even though Miss Andy lived in the Red Castle as Daenerys' maid, she was very frugal and felt that wasting anything was a sin. Her biggest dream was to become rich and then benefit her hometown so that the whole island of Nas would become rich instead of being bullied and catching slaves all day long, so she chose the School of Economics. Fortunately, the medical school, the School of Economics and the seminary are not far away from each other. They are all in the center of King's Landing, near the Great Sept of St. Bela. The huge circular square has several main roads in King's Landing, leading directly to various major places in King's Landing. Silent Sister Street leads to the Dragon Cave, now the Military Academy, and the main road of the central axis to the northwest is the Shoemaker Square, the main scattered market in King's Landing, and the southeast of the main road of the central axis is Egan High Hill, the main concentration of the Westeros Palace and the dignitaries in King's Landing, which is also called King's Hill by the people. After the silver-haired beauty Daenerys left, only Viserys and Rhaenys were left in the restaurant of the Red Castle, and the two were chatting about something. By the way, Rhaenys was about to say something, but at this moment, the silver-haired young man's eyes flashed slightly. Bessie? Because of the seed planted in Bessie, Viserys was the source, so that he could communicate directly through the black fog. But Bessie rarely contacted him directly in this way. There was almost no big deal, and Bessie would not use it to chat for nothing. Your Majesty. The iron-faced man sitting on the throne of the Prince of Pentos Palace on the other side of the narrow sea closed his eyes slightly. This is a telepathic communication. He can directly express what he thinks, just like the connection between Viserys and his partner Balerion. Dragon riders and their dragons have mutual induction, but the connection between Viserys and Balerion is far stronger than that of ordinary dragon riders. The two are not only master and servant, but also partners and friends who fight side by side. Viserys could sense the fluctuations in Balerion's state, and Balerion could also sense Viserys' joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness. After waiting for Bessie to express everything he wanted to say, Viserys fell into deep thought. Pirate Governor? Salador's son? He seemed to have some impression of this person. He claimed to be a friend of Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, which made Viserys remember his identity even more. This pirate governor seemed to be a character who appeared in the original trajectory. He helped Stannis attack King's Landing and wanted to get a generous bonus and title, but Stannis did not expect that he would lose the Battle of Blackwater Bay. Although he was later named the Earl of Blackwater Bay, he did not wait for Stannis' bonus for a long time, and finally Salador Saan left Stannis in despair. However, in the current trajectory, the appearance of Viserys is not a butterfly flapping its wings and then attracting a tornado. His appearance almost caused a huge shock to the whole world, from the Bone Mountains to the Sunset Sea, and it may even affect the end of the world east of the Bone Mountains. The dragon reappeared in the world. The Targaryen family once again sat firmly on the Iron Throne. The trading city-states declined, and a prosperous country rose in the west. A Khal among the Dothraki unified all the Khals. Now, for some reason, all the Grassland Knights are heading east. Therefore, it is not surprising that a small pirate was influenced by Viserys and changed his original destiny to become a so-called governor. Tell this pirate governor that the Iron Throne will not give him any support. Let him figure out the rest. Viserys thought for a moment and gave an attitude that was considered a tacit consent, but he would not intervene directly. A me that was rebuilt after destruction was not worth him sending troops to invade, which would arouse the vigilance of the surrounding trading city-states. Although the momentum of the trading city-states is declining now and has lost its status as the boss of the Western world, after all, a lean camel is bigger than a horse, and Viserys does not want to add trouble when the North and Dawn have not been completely pacified. After all, there is a bigger enemy that has not yet appeared. The 5-year period predicted by Melisandre is neither long nor short. After the Night King recuperates, he will surely set off a bigger wave that will sweep across the 7 kingdoms. Viserys never forgets that he has such an enemy waiting for him. Chapter 659, Tracking the White Walkers. A black knight landed on a branch and looked down at it. Then he tilted his head and made a shrill cry, and then flapped his wings and flew into the sky. After the Night's Watch recaptured Winterfell, It has been like a horse race, recaptured other castles and towns in the north, even including the last half city. Lord Commander Jeff Mormont of the Night's Watch led the army to recapture most of the lost land in the north, but before he could recapture his home, he rushed to the wall on Bear Island on the Frost Bay. This is the hometown of all the soldiers of the Night's Watch. Since Jeff Mormont swore an oath to the Weirwood, he is no longer the Earl of Bear Island, but the Commander-in-Chief of the Night's Watch. For him, responsibility is greater than personal feelings. The wall still stands majestically above the earth. It is about 300 miles long and 700 feet high. It stretches endlessly, with no end in sight, covering half of the sky. The Black Knight rode his horse on the hillside, facing the snow and wind, looking at the Great Wall in the distance. The Great Wall stood tall and majestic, shocking people. The recruits of the Night's Watch couldn't help but whisper to each other when they saw this scene, feeling the awe rising from the bottom of their hearts. However, the collapsed section, when the wildlings blew the horn of winter, was so conspicuous, just like a hole dug in a magnificent dam. No matter how strong the defense was, it was useless. The wildlings and the White Walkers got in through this hole and cholera the entire land of Westeros. Now if I see it again, I want to kill the wildlings again. Stannis acted too early. The king of the wildlings should repent of his terrible crimes before being executed. Eddard Stark rode his horse on the high hill. The biting cold wind blew the wolfskin cloak on his shoulders, looking at the collapsed section of the Great Wall in the distance, and then couldn't help but speak in a hoarse voice. Mance Rayder, the king of the free people, blew the horn of winter and collapsed the wall. However, his actions directly led to the White Walkers being able to cross the wall and invade the land of the Seven Kingdoms behind the wall. In the Great Escape from the North, how many people fled their homes, and how many people fell forever on the road of leaving their homes? Their wives, husbands, children, parents, and even their bodies were frozen to death, or starved to death. People did not dare to bury their bodies, leaving them with a memory in the future. They could only burn all the bodies in a fire, to prevent them from becoming new enemies after the cold wind blew. On the other side, Benjen, who was riding a horse and following his brother, turned his head and looked at Eddard, then shook his head silently without speaking. He wanted to say that these wildlings were also trying to survive. If Mance Rayder did not blow the horn of winter and the wall would not be open to them, then his people would all die at the hands of the White Walkers. In the final analysis, this was Robert's responsibility. Robert insisted that they should kneel down and surrender before they could pass through the wall. However, the free people refused to kneel down because they held the artifact that could break through the wall. However, if you put it this way, after the wildlings entered the wall, they did not produce, did not know how to farm, did not know how to graze, and only lived on plunder, which would inevitably harm the people of the Seven Kingdoms. As the king of the Seven Kingdoms, Robert's rejection of the wildlings to protect his people now seems to be understandable. However, it is useless to say these things now. Things have passed. The people are gone. The grass on Robert's grave is several feet high now. I don't know if there is anyone to weed him except Eddard. There is no need to argue with his brother for such a small matter. Although Benjen hated the wildlings because they killed many of his brothers, he also knew that the wildlings were also human beings. It just happened that before the construction of the wall, their ancestors chose to live in another area, so they were isolated. But how could the noble and honorable Eddard Stark know how the wildlings live? When we get to Castle Black, I'll go there. Bring back Lyanna. Benjen didn't respond to his brother's words. He held the reins with one hand, then turned around and spoke in a relaxed tone. However, Benjen's words made Eddard's heart sink slightly. He looked at his younger brother with a pair of grey eyes, and the neatly trimmed beard on his chin was slightly grey. Benjen. Since the last time in the cellar of Winterfell, Eddard told Benjen that when he got to the wall, he wanted to ask Lord Commander Mormont for permission to go north of the wall alone, with one horse and one sword, to track the traces of the White Walkers and find his sister. However, Eddard's decision was strongly opposed by Benjen. Eddard couldn't be more familiar with life outside the wall than himself, and more experienced. And although Eddard is now wearing black clothes, he is the former Duke of Winterfell after all. He has his own sisters-in-law, Robb, Sansa, Jon, Arya and Bran, while he is alone, free and unrestrained. He is more suitable for adventure than Eddard. Therefore, Benjamin strongly opposed Edward's adventure alone. He was willing to go north to the wall on behalf of his brother. After all, he also had an obligation to find Lyanna, who was his sister. In the end, the result of the argument between the two brothers was that Edward did not win over Benjamin. Perhaps he had not completely let go of his wife and children in his heart and could not live completely for himself. Both Stark brothers inherited the straightforward character of the Northerners, and there was not so much hypocrisy. Benjamin was willing to take the risk on behalf of his brother, and Edward was not pretending to do so. "I owe you a life, Benjamin." Then the middle-aged man with dark brown hair spoke seriously, and even Benjamin's smile slowly withdrew. He also looked at Edward with a sharp gaze, and then promised solemnly, "I will come back alive, brother. I will also bring back Lyanna." The soldiers of the Night's Watch, which seemed to have no end at a glance, entered the Black Castle, which had collapsed a few years ago. The main task waiting for the Legion was to repair the Great Wall. Although according to mythological records, spells and magic were woven inside the Great Wall to reinforce it and prevent mysterious species from crossing, such as the White Walkers. But from a military point of view, the Great Wall cannot be left with such a large gap. If it can be repaired, it should be repaired with all its ability. The two Stark brothers also rode their horses to catch up with the team and came to the collapsed Black Castle. Benjamin rested in the city for a night and made sufficient preparations. After obtaining the permission of Lord Commander Mormont, he did not say goodbye to anyone the next morning, nor did he tell his brother in advance when he would leave today. He was alone, with a horse, a sword, and a long back. Drowned in the wind and snow, galloping towards the north with no end in sight. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 660. Death of Bunan. The climate outside the Great Wall is worse than that south of the Great Wall. The white snow keeps falling, and the biting cold wind seems to penetrate the clothes. The north has been basically recovered under the advancement of the Night's Watch, and with the advancement of human soldiers, the coldness that shrouds the entire northern land seems to be slowly receding. This is the only lucky thing among 10,000 unfortunate things. Some human soldiers sang praises to the achievements of the old gods, some believed that the 7 gods defeated the White Walkers, and a small number of soldiers who converted to the Red God believed that light defeated darkness. They are the warriors of the Lord of Light, and the northern gods are already afraid of their iron will. However, there are at least a few people who believe that man will conquer nature. Where do the gods come from? Humans repelled the White Walkers by countless soldiers who sacrificed their lives and shed their blood. Only when the whole country is united and all mankind unites can they finally defeat the White Walkers. Everyone has their own opinions, but it is an indisputable fact that the north is becoming warmer and warmer. Even now, some northerners who miss their hometown have begun to embark on the journey home. However, all this has nothing to do with the biting cold wind north of the Great Wall. It is cold here all year round, regardless of winter or summer. The existence of the Great Wall prevents the cold wind from going south, but it also keeps winter here forever. Benjamin, who left the Great Wall and entered the outer wall alone, rode a skinny black and yellow warhorse, wearing a black cloak and a long sword on his waist. At this moment, he was struggling to move forward in the white wind and snow. He planned to rush to Craster's castle to rest temporarily today, and then set off to the Fist of the First Men and other places tomorrow. Craster is a wild man who has a tacit cooperation with the Night's Watch. He is responsible for entertaining the Night's Watch, and the Night's Watch allows him to live in the haunted forest without being cleared. Unfortunately, the wind and snow outside the wall today are too strong. Even the warhorse is moving forward with 1 foot deep and 1 foot shallow, and even slipped a few times, almost knocking Benjamin off the horse. Damn it. Benjamin was forced to change his plan and turned to run to the nearest White Tree village. This is the nearest freeman village to the wall. They are also wild people like Craster who have not openly opposed the Night's Watch, so they are allowed to live in the haunted forest. Benjamin rode a thin yellow-black warhorse in the snow and disappeared in the snow. He did not notice that a shaky shadow had discovered him behind him and then followed him quietly to the northeast. White Tree Village is the nearest village to the north of the wall. Although the snow is a bit strong now, Benjamin still rushed here after half a day. The snow is too strong now. He must find a suitable place to stay and avoid the snow. Otherwise, he will freeze to death in the wilderness before he can find Liona's trace. Although Benjen has rich experience in living outside the wall and is a senior Night's Watch, he knows very well that if he does not have a place to stay in such a snowstorm, he will definitely die. White Tree Village was a village of free folk, but now the masters of this place have disappeared. Benjen vaguely remembered that when King Robert came to the wall, he went out to massacre several free folk villages and even killed the first White Walker, but he forgot whether the villagers of White Tree Village died at the hands of the coalition soldiers, the wildlings of other tribes, or the White Walkers. However, one result is certain: they are all dead, no matter who killed them, and they have a common destination, that is, to become those blue-eyed enemies. White Tree Village is not large in scale, consisting of 4 single houses surrounding a sheepfold and a well. The houses are made of stone, so they will not be blown down by the wind, and the windows are covered with animal fur, which plays a certain role in keeping warm. But now the windows of White Tree Village are broken, and even one house has collapsed, accumulating thick snow. There is also a giant fishbeam tree in the middle of the village. Its branches are pale and all the leaves have fallen off. There is a terrifying face on the trunk, and its mouth alone is big enough to swallow a whole sheep. This fishbeam tree is dead. Benjen rode a skinny warhorse to White Tree Village. He sat on the horse and looked up at the giant fishbeam tree in front of him. He could see at a glance that the fishbeam tree had lost all its vitality. For some reason, he had a sense of foreboding in his heart, because fishbeam trees are spread all over the north and beyond the wall, and are considered one of the plants that can best withstand the cold. Did it freeze to death? Or is there another reason? Benjen's head was full of wind and snow, and the gloom accumulated in his heart became deeper and deeper, but at this moment he had no time to think about it, and was just about to turn over and get off the horse. However, at this moment, the attack of the White came very suddenly. A blue-eyed, rugged zombie suddenly appeared out of thin air, let out a terrifying roar, and then rushed out from behind a tree, and rushed directly to Benjen. The snow and wind covered his footprints, and the cold weather obliterated the stench on his body. However, the chief ranger of the Night's Watch naturally reacted quickly when he was suddenly attacked. Benjen fell off his horse, holding a long sword, and cutting off the arm of the White that was reaching out to him. But at this moment, the quiet White Tree Village seemed to come alive suddenly, and the noise of the battle suddenly attracted more whites. They let out sharp howls, as if they were crazy, and then rushed towards Benjen. The chief ranger's face was tense, waving the long sword in his hand and constantly slashing the whites around him. Puff. However, it was a pity that he was outnumbered after all. He chopped down several whites in a row, but a white that looked like a woman jumped up from behind and pounced directly on his back. The white's legs clamped around Benjen's body, and it opened its bloody mouth with half of its cheek rotted and black gums exposed, and began to bite his neck frantically. Benjen let out a desperate roar in pain, then threw the white off his back, chopped off her head with a sword, and rolled far away. However, her head was still making a creepy roar, and her body that fell to the ground was also moving around, as if she was still looking for Benjen's trace. The chief ranger of the Night's Watch held a long sword in one hand to kill the enemy, and covered the wound on his neck with the other hand, and blood kept flowing out. I'm going to die. Benjen seemed to have a premonition of his future. He staggered forward a few steps, but in the end, the world was spinning, his eyes went black, and he fell headfirst in front of the dead giant fishbeam wood. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 661, Lord Erenhal. Ramsay Snow has worked diligently for many years, and he is specially granted the name of Bolton and Erenhal as his fiefdom. Appoint Ramsay Bolton as the Earl of Erenhal. After Viserys sat firmly on the Iron Throne, he appointed a large number of meritorious generals who had followed him to conquer the world, but there was still one person who had never been appointed. That was Ramsay, the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. One of the reasons was that Ramsay had a special identity. He was a bastard in the north. The status of bastards in this era was extremely low, not valued, and even despised. Another reason was that Ramsay had a bad reputation. He was the dark side of Viserys's light. He usually did some work to take the blame for the royal family, which was basically not presentable. He also monitored all the important officials and nobles under the Iron Throne. There were rumors in King's Landing that a noble was secretly having an affair with his mistress. The mistress screamed a few times that night, and the noble himself didn't know, but Ramsay knew it well. No one likes to make friends with such people, but Ramsay seems to enjoy it. Because he knew very well his position in Viserys' heart. No matter how many people hated him, as long as Viserys didn't hate him, he would never lose power. As long as he was still useful, Viserys would not give up on him, so he didn't need to make any friends. If he really tried to make friends, he would just put his head under the sword of the good dog of the royal law enforcement officer. Therefore, Ramsay's reputation in the noble circle was very bad, and the voices to restore Ramsay's surname and make him a noble were greatly suppressed. Ramsay also had an elder brother named Domeric Bolton, the current Earl of the Dreadfort, but the relationship between the two brothers was not very good. Domeric simply felt that his brother's personality was too crazy, and the way he looked at him made him a little uncomfortable. The young Earl of the Dreadfort had no idea that Ramsay had wanted to kill him. Ramsay acted privately that year and sent people to kill his father, the former Earl of the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton, on the chaotic battlefield. At that time, the assassin sent by Ramsay told Roose Bolton in his ear that Domeric Bolton will soon go down to accompany him. But Ramsay broke his promise, because the fact that Ramsay sent someone to assassinate his father was leaked and known by Viserys. Viserys once asked him to choose between a dagger and poison. Ramsay cried and begged Viserys to spare his life. The illusion of power and the feeling of being in a daze disappeared. At that time, Ramsay felt that he had mastered the real power. He could monitor anyone he wanted to monitor. Ramsay's own character was that of a dog that could not be tamed, so after he was full, he gradually became swollen. However, Viserys' timely knock was like a basin of cold water poured down, which directly extinguished all of Ramsay's illusions. It turned out that he monitored everyone, but he was also being monitored. He was a dog from beginning to end, and never had real power. After that beating, Ramsay was spared, but he suffered extremely cruel punishment. He did not appear in public for a whole 6 months, and disappeared from everyone's sight. Since then, Ramsay has never thought of his brother Domeric again. Therefore, the kind Earl of the Dreadfort, who was disappointed with his brother and wanted to persuade him to turn over a new leaf, never thought that Ramsay was the murderer of their father, and he had even walked through the gates of hell. Direnhal is a more suitable destination for Ramsay. Although Ramsay has made mistakes, Viserys has not forgotten that he has also made many contributions. He can even rank in the top 5 in the credit book of regaining the Iron Throne. Direnhal is located in the Riverlands, on the north bank of the God's Eye Lake. It was once the capital of the Three Rivers for a short time, and this castle definitely has this qualification, because it is the largest castle in the entire Westeros. However, due to historical reasons, Direnhal has been the birthplace of many tragedies, so it has always had an ominous reputation. But others were afraid of these things, but Ramsay was not. In the eyes of many criminals he had interrogated, he was the most terrifying demon in the world. He himself was a demon, so why should he be afraid of ghosts? Therefore, Ramsay, who rarely appeared in public, knelt on the stone steps in front of the Iron Throne in the throne room, his black cloak hanging on the ground, his white cheeks showing joy, and then he kowtowed several times. "Thank you, your majesty." Others kneeled on one knee in front of the king, including the king's guard, the king's chamberlain, and even an ordinary noble. However, Ramsay was different. When he knelt in front of Viserys, he always knelt on both knees, wagging his tail, and was very pious and loyal. Earl of Direnhal. The many nobles in the throne room, including the important ministers of the king's chamber, were all silent. Earl of Direnhal. Lord Ramsay Bolton. Then I don't know who started it first, and then there was sparse applause at the scene, which was barely considered a face giving. From this, we can see how few friends Ramsay has in the court despite his high position. However, Ramsay did not care and then withdrew. After the 7 kingdoms were pacified, the new rule of the Iron Throne was that the council of the king's court would be held once a week. If there were special important matters, the important ministers of the council of the king's court would be temporarily gathered. The council of the king's court mainly discussed the specific affairs of the country. The court in the throne room was held once every half a month, gathering the nobles, wealthy businessmen, and representatives from all walks of life in King's Landing. The court in the throne room was mainly for a standardized form. In fact, the content to be discussed in the court had been discussed in advance in the council of the king's court, including today's appointment of Ramsay as the Earl of Harrenhal. It was also negotiated in advance. After selecting and choosing, only Harrenhal among the vacant castles in the Seven Kingdoms met Ramsay's merits and status, so Harrenhal was appointed to him. After Ramsay Bolton was crowned, the next thing was to do. Now that the king's hand, Lord John Connington, was leading his army to Dawn, the person with the most say in the royal council in King's Landing was the Prince of Dawn. This matter was not concealed, and rumors had been circulating a few days ago, so many people who knew about it turned their attention to the Minister of Justice, a baron. Your Majesty. Then the Prince of Dawn did not disappoint everyone's expectations. He was wearing a sandy yellow robe and a golden sun emblem on his shoulders. He walked out of the sequence of ministers and spoke. The North has been recovered, and the country has reached an unprecedented prosperity. We should give the country a new name. Chapter 662. Heir of Valyria. The Prime Minister left King's Landing to go on an expedition to Dawn. As the head of the ministers, Law Minister Oberyn stood up and made a proposal, which naturally caused many uninformed nobles present to look at each other in bewilderment. The concept of the Seven Kingdoms is deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. After all, this political system has been maintained for 300 years, spanning more than a dozen generations. As a conqueror, Aegon I conquered the 6 kingdoms of Westeros with 3 dragons, and the 7th country, Dawn, was also incorporated into the system of the Iron Throne in a later marriage. Therefore, people are familiar with the concept of the 7 kingdoms, and know that the Iron Throne now symbolizes royal power. However, after the War of Conquest, Aegon did not completely erase the shadow of the former 7 kingdoms, and even coexisted with the former nobles of the 7 kingdoms. If it were placed in the past, putting oneself in the shoes of Aegon in the situation he faced, perhaps one could understand the decision made by this conqueror. Because no one had unified the entire Westeros and the 7 kingdoms before him, the concept that the 7 kingdoms needed to be unified was not deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The people of the Reach are hostile to the kingdom of Casterly Rock, the kingdom of Storm is hostile to the Reach, and the king of the North sits in Winterfell and overlooks the world. The people of each country are the people of each country, and there is no concept of unity. Aegon the Conqueror is facing a process from nothing to something, and this process needs time to settle. If he wants to unify the 7 kingdoms and sit firmly on his own throne, he may have to make such a choice and reach a compromise with the nobles of the 7 kingdoms. The king and the nobles jointly govern the country in exchange for the cooperation and submission of the former nobles of the 7 kingdoms to the new kingship. Otherwise, if Aegon's character is very tough, and the country would rather break than bend, then the situation he faces will become very complicated. In a short period of time, he will rely on violence to stabilize the country, but the follow-up will inevitably be full of wars and anti-songs everywhere. The situation Viserys is facing now is different from Aegon. Because of Aegon's previous unification, the concept of the unification of the 7 kingdoms has now been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Even ordinary people know the benefits of unification, eliminating wars, uniting more people, and making the country peaceful, and living in peace and contentment. With Aegon in the lead, the people and nobles of Westeros now regard unification as a necessary condition. For this reason, when Viserys occupied the Reach and King's Landing, he was surrounded by the remnants of the Baratheon dynasty. Although the two sides tacitly agreed to a temporary truce, they never mentioned a truce. Because the two sides could not split in their thinking and concepts, one side must annex the other. Either Viserys destroyed them, or they destroyed Viserys. Of course, if Viserys chose to compromise like Aegon at that time, and put down the knife that cut the power of the nobles, perhaps the unification of the country would be completed in an instant. But that would be another reincarnation, re-engraving the path that Aegon had taken. Viserys did not make such a choice, but chose to fight to the end with the old nobles. Inch by inch, Their spines were broken bit by bit, and they knelt on the ground and begged for mercy, or simply like the Hightower family, they did not even have the opportunity to beg for mercy and were completely wiped out from this world. Therefore, it is not that Egan is short-sighted, but that Viserys' conditions are much more mature than his. At this moment, Oberyn's sudden proposal was actually something that the Royal Council had already discussed. This matter had been discussed a few months ago before John Connington left King's Landing. This is a big deal. Except for a few stubborn and conservative people like Minister of Agriculture Alistair Florent, most of the important ministers in the Royal Council are capable people with extremely open and active ideas. Viserys' Royal Council, including the governors of various places, can be said to be talented. The backbone of the traditional nobles was broken, the power of the traditional nobles was weakened, and the royal power was consolidated. The next step is to weaken the concept of the Seven Kingdoms and consolidate the concept of the whole country. The first person to propose this idea was Minister of Intelligence Varys, who insisted that the concept of Seven Kingdoms should no longer be used in official documents, including nouns, and it should not be mentioned. Instead, it should be replaced with King of Westeros and other words, emphasizing unified vocabulary. However, Varys' initial view was not generally accepted. The main reason was the change of ideas and habits. Sometimes it takes a generation to change a habit. Now, after hearing Oberyn's proposal, the nobles of King's Landing, the wealthy businessmen, and representatives from all walks of life in the throne room below all looked at each other and couldn't help but whisper. The name of the country? What should our country be called? Wasn't it called the Iron Throne before? Some people with lower education couldn't help but ask, but were immediately explained by the people around them. It's just like the Kingdom of the North and the Kingdom of the Valley before the unification of the Seven Kingdoms. Some people explained, some suddenly realized, and some thought they were knowledgeable and wanted to show off their talents at this time. After thinking hard for a moment, they proposed, we can call it the Kingdom of Westeros. The land under our feet is called Westeros. This is our hometown. However, he encountered opposition before he finished speaking. Have you forgotten Mandalus, the place where your majesty started his family's life, and Pentus, which is overseas? That is also the territory of the country. I suggest that we should call it the United Kingdom of Westeros, Andalus, and Pentus. Another person suggested, but was immediately retorted by the person just now. It's too long. The name you gave is longer than my grandmother's turban. The throne room below was noisy. Viserys, who sat on the Iron Throne, tapped his fingers lightly on the cold armrests without speaking, and the important ministers of the Royal Council in the front row were also silent. Because such an important issue would naturally not be discussed in a place like the throne room, which was like a hodgepodge. In fact, the Royal Council had already discussed a result, and the throne room was just a formality. Valyria. Then, Oberyn, the Lord Chancellor of Justice, who was still the first to propose this idea, spoke up. As soon as he spoke, all the noisy voices in the throne room disappeared. Although Oberyn was not very popular like Ramsay, he was still very powerful. No one dared to offend this Minister of Justice who held military power. Valyria is the greatest country, since humans learned to remember things. And the Targaryen family originated in Valyria, and is the most powerful heir to the freehold. Therefore, I propose that your majesty raise the claim to the ancient empire and rebuild Valyria. Chapter 663, Emperor of Valyria. Rebuild Valyria. Restore the ancient empire. Oberyn's words made the chaotic throne room suddenly quiet, as if you could hear a pin drop. Then, after only a few seconds of silence, it exploded like a heavy bomb. They had heard of the reputation of Valyria, even the most ignorant nobles present. This is the greatest country built by humans in ancient and modern times. They have the most powerful army on the surface and in the sky, hundreds of thousands of slave legions, and hundreds of dragons. When they existed, they enslaved the entire world and even spread to a distant eastern country. People there have heard of the name of the Valyrian Free Fortress. They arrogantly declared themselves to be a country that can challenge the gods. Oh my god. How is this possible? Everyone in the throne room was in an uproar and talked a lot. Some people couldn't believe it, but at the same time, there were nobles with grey hair and beards with incredible eyes. This is shocking. Your Majesty's ambitions seem to have not reached their end. Their keen political sense and rich experience told them that this was not just a matter of name, but also the ambition of the empire to conquer the world. The Valyrian freehold had been destroyed after the Doomsday Scourge, and now there are many city-states in the world that claim to be the heirs of this great empire. For example, Lys, Volantis, etc. Lys is the native colony of Valyria and has not experienced conquest. Volantis is the earliest colony established by Valyria, with a long history, and is known as the eldest daughter of Valyria. However, none of these city-states or families that claim to be the heirs of the freehold are more qualified than the Targaryen family to claim the right to claim the empire. Because the Targaryen family is one of the 40 dragon families in Valyria, and is the family that can openly participate in the selection of the king in Valyria. Within its gleaming walls, 40 hostile families fight each other for power and glory in the court, and engage in an endless, insidious, and often cruel and bloody struggle over the rise and fall of the right to speak. This is the greatest asset of the Targaryen family, enough to claim the ancient empire. Now no one in the world has this qualification except the Targaryen family. And Volantis, known as the eldest daughter of Valyria and the mistress of the Summer Sea, was just a slave of the empire back then. What qualifications do slaves have to claim that they are the heirs of the freehold? The Targaryen family is one of the masters of the freehold of Valyria, and Viserys is also the last patriarch of the dragon family in the world today, the last dragon king. When one day he mentions the claim to the freehold of Valyria, the claims of other city-states will be just like dirt on the ground, not worth mentioning. Will our claim to Valyria cause opposition from the free cities? Someone in the throne room asked in doubt. Opposition from the trade cities? Is it worth worrying about? Then someone else also refuted with a proud look. The free cities were eclipsed by the rise of the Iron Throne, and the Westeros nobles who were once suffocated by the trade cities and the Iron Bank naturally turned over and sang, "I agree. Your Majesty is the last dragon king in the world and the last heir to Valyria." At this time, the short and strong Grand Maester Dr. Marwyn stood up and spoke. Maester Bull was the most excited about changing the country's name to Valyria and mentioning the Targaryen family's claim to the free fortress. Because he had studied the history and past of Valyria in depth, and the deeper he studied, the more fascinated he was about this great country, and their king happened to be the heir to that great empire. He had the sacred blood of the dragon family flowing in his body, and was fully qualified to inherit and rebuild this great empire. The Valyrian freehold is a system of collective election of kings, chosen by 40 dragon families after brutal struggles, which does not suit our national conditions. We have one and only one king. Our territory spans both sides of the narrow sea, from the Arbor to the Wall, from Feast Fire to Hell of Souls, with countless people, integrating multiple nationalities, multiple cultural heritages, and multiple languages. A wise man once said that the king is supreme in his own kingdom, and is the emperor. Therefore, I propose that your majesty should change the title from king to emperor. Grand Maester Marwyn stood in front of the Iron Throne, looking at the noisy nobles of King's Landing, and representatives of various industries of the wealthy businessmen below, then turned his head to look at the calm silver-haired young man sitting on the Iron Throne, and then spoke in a low and deep voice, which echoed repeatedly in the hall. The nobles in the throne room once again talked a lot, but this time the discussion was much quieter than before, because the sudden mention of the claim to Valyria was a huge bombshell. Later, it was not so unexpected that Viserys would change his title from king to emperor, because now the country's strength can be called an empire, and the outside world has generally called the Iron Throne an empire, and the emperor is indeed a higher level title than the king in both the common language and the High Valyrian language. The emperor in the broad sense of the Andal, the Rhoynar, and even the Valyrian people, although the vocabulary and pronunciation are different, the meaning is the same, all of which are the legendary king above the king, king of kings. The emperor is a collection of military, political, judicial and other powers. The emperor's power is more highly concentrated than that of the king, unlike the kings before Westeros who were just a large noble. The country that the emperor can rule is also stronger. Even if it is not unifying the entire known civilized world, it must also be the absolute king of a certain region. It is for this reason that the Dragon King Orion, who escaped from the doomsday scourge of Valyria, chose to proclaim himself the Emperor of Valyria instead of the King of Valyria. For Valyria's size and reputation, self-proclaimed king is an act of self-degradation. Agree. I also think that your majesty should be emperor. After Grand Maester Marwyn finished speaking, other important officials who had been silent all the time also spoke up at this time. The throne room of the Red Keep is now the political core of the entire country. Every weak wind direction in it will become a strong wind that sweeps thousands of miles. The statements of many important officials in front of the king made this signal clear. Although the people in the throne room have different levels of knowledge, there is no fool. They keenly grasped this signal and then shouted Viserys' name together. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. The meaning of the emperor of a country in the Western world is similar to that of China. It is probably the boss of the entire civilization circle, which means a little higher than the king. The emperor of the Western world also has his own unique self-proclaimed name, similar to our I, so it is generally translated as I. Chapter 664, Reconstruction Determination. Viserys' coronation as emperor was a big deal, but what was even bigger was his claim to Valyria. In fact, the real political decisions were made in the royal council long ago, and the court session in the throne room was an opportunity to send a signal to the outside world. The Iron Throne's claim to Valyria would naturally cause a backlash from the trading cities, because although they all claimed to be the successors of the great empire, none of the city-states had the strength to restore the Fortress of Freedom, but Viserys had this strength. This was the biggest contradiction. Although everyone was full of admiration for the great empire thousands of years ago, people imagined how luxurious the capital of the empire, Valyria, would be, how majestic the army would be, and what it would be like when hundreds of dragons were flying. However, except for themselves, perhaps no one wanted to see this great empire return to the world. Because in addition to the praise and yearning for Valyria, there were the blood and tears shed by the many city-states and countries enslaved by it. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. The next morning, many cavalrymen carrying official documents rushed out of King's Landing. Flutter, dozens of ravens raised in the Red Castle were also released in one breath, with letters tied to their bodies to deliver to Westeros, Pentos, Andalus, and every inch of the empire. In King's Landing, a soldier from the Capital Guard posted a notice on the streets and alleys of King's Landing, which soon attracted many people and merchants to watch. What's written on it? Can anyone understand it? Although King's Landing is the capital of Westeros, the literacy rate of the people here is still very low, and most of them are illiterate, so they can only ask for help from people who can read. 295 years of the Egan calendar, 3 years of the new calendar. There was still a literate person among the crowd watching in the Shoemaker's Square. He looked very young, with long light golden hair, wearing light brown leather armor, a cloak of the Targaryen family, and a long sword hanging from his waist. His name is Kem, and he comes from Flea Bottom. He used to be a mercenary, and participated in the Battle of the Golden Group besieging King's Landing. Later, when the capital of the Seven Kingdoms surrendered, he also joined the Second Legion. Then the Second Conquest War broke out, and Kem followed their King Viserys to personally attack the Stormlands. The young man with light golden hair made the first contribution in the battle, and was the first to climb the Bronze Gate City. He was appreciated by Viserys, and was personally knighted by him. He was one of the few knights personally appointed by the king who was not of noble birth. Therefore, Kem was flattered and grateful. His loyalty to the king in his heart was beyond words, and he even regarded him as a god. After all, how many people in the world can receive such an honor? Kem was knighted, and then after the war, he was rewarded with a village fiefdom. The fiefdom was located in the Riverlands. He successfully became a village chief, and jumped from a child who grew up in Flea Bottom to the lowest level of nobles. This was something Kem never dared to dream of when he was a child. However, the times have changed. The biggest change after Viserys became king was to give civilians many opportunities and break the monopoly of the old nobles. In the tide of this new era, opportunities exist every moment, even like raindrops hitting him, and Kem will naturally not let go. Later, he did not serve as a village chief for a long time, and because he led the militia to repel the attacks of the Brotherhood several times, He took the opportunity to chase the farmers and wiped out the robbers, and was appreciated by the kingdom's naval minister, Lord Bracken, the governor of the Riverland. So Lord Bracken summoned him to Riverrun, made an exception, and gave him a precious recommendation quota, and sent him to the military academy in King's Landing for further study. As the king's most trusted minister, Geoffrey Bracken naturally knew how much Viserys valued the reform of the academy, and the military academy was the top priority, and Viserys paid the most attention to it. Therefore, the first batch of recommended places to join the academy are very precious. If you seize the opportunity, you may be able to rise to prominence and change your destiny directly, but if you miss this opportunity, you may regret it for the rest of your life. Therefore, the first batch of students who did not take this learning opportunity seriously will not be punished, because it is irresponsible for their own destiny. The young and promising Kem listened to the advice of the governor, seized this opportunity, and studied hard in the academy. He started from learning to read. The young man who was once from Flea Bottom not only knows how to read now, but also won the first place in the monthly exams several times in a row. According to the determination to rebuild Valyria, the Targaryen family raised the claim to the ancient empire and changed the name of the country to Valyria. I will ascend the throne and become the first emperor of Valyria, starting from now until the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the rivers dry up and the mountains fall like dead leaves in the wind. Kem, an officer of the 2nd Legion, wore a cloak of the Targaryen family, holding the hilt of his sword, and reading the contents of the Emperor's edict word by word. This was written by Viserys, and the court scholars copied it one by one, so the contents above were all in the first person of Viserys. The people and merchants of King's Landing who were around him were listening carefully. At first they didn't understand, but later they couldn't help but burst into an uproar. Has your majesty been crowned emperor? Your majesty will rebuild Valyria. The people of King's Landing didn't understand what kind of political trend the Iron Throne's move represented, but they were still excited from the bottom of their hearts and couldn't help shouting Viserys' name, because it symbolized the strength of the country. A strong country is naturally free from external invasion, and the people can live and work in peace and contentment. When facing merchants coming from across the narrow sea, they can hold their heads high and be proud. King Viserys, your majesty, wrong. We should call him His Majesty the Emperor now. The most honorable emperor of the Andals, Rhoynar, and Valyrians has ascended the throne. Long live His Majesty the Emperor. Notices were posted on the streets and alleys of King's Landing, and the people cheered and surged to the square below the Red Castle like a tide, shouting the name of His Majesty the Emperor towards the palace above. The merchants who traveled between Westeros and Essos couldn't help but change their expressions after seeing these notices. They instinctively felt that something big was going to happen, so they hurried back to their homes to write letters to their hometowns, telling them what happened in King's Landing. Chapter 665, Battle of Shianji City. The rolling wheel of history will not stop because of a certain thing. Just when King's Landing made the historically important decision to rebuild Valyria in the distant dawn, on the battlefield of Sky City, there was a war. Kill. The soldiers of the Royal Army were launching a fierce attack on this Sky City. Sky City was located behind the Prince's Pass, at the end of an ancient road. The reason why Sky City was called Sky City was because it was located at a high place, easy to defend, and difficult to attack. There were rugged rocks below, no decent roads and flat land. War machines such as catapults and siege vehicles could not be deployed here at all. They could only rely on the flesh and blood of the soldiers to hold up the ladders and attack the city walls. Kill. At this moment, the dawn teenager Karen, wearing light leather armor and the cloak of the Clinton family of Storm's End, led a group of archers to shoot arrows at the walls of Sky City and suppress the archers on the walls. He was the most gifted hunter in the village. As long as he had a bow and arrow in his hand, his prey would often not escape his pursuit. In his eyes, there was no difference between shooting people and shooting animals. In fact, humans were not as flexible as animals, and their movements were as clumsy as a big brown bear. The brown-haired boy pulled the bow and arrow, narrowed his eyes, and aimed at a Fowler family soldier who was sticking his head out from behind the parapet, then loosened his fingers, and the bowstring suddenly made a sound. Bang, the sharp arrow flew out of the boy's hand, fast, accurate, and ruthless, and it drilled into the Fowler family soldier's eye socket accurately, as if it had eyes. Ah, the opponent immediately let out a shrill scream, and then fell from the top of the city, knocking a Wangjun soldier who was halfway up the ladder off the cloud ladder. The two rolled down the city wall together, and fell half to death. The walls of Shianji City were also bare and strange rocks, which were extremely hard, and some were covered with sharp points, so falling from the city wall would either kill or injure. After the Dornish young man Cullen led 50 warriors to cross the Red Mountains, and after many hardships, he successfully took the but of the Prince's Pass, defeated the soldiers of the Fowler family, and successfully occupied the pass. He was personally appointed by the King's Hand John Connington. Cullen was appointed as a Knight of the Stormlands for his meritorious service, and he will have his own fiefdom and position when he returns to the Stormlands in the future. However, at this moment, he is fighting side by side with his companions, attacking Shianji City, and avenging his father, mother, and brother. Go to hell. The brown-haired young man hid behind a rock, and took an arrow from the quiver behind his back again, then drew his bow and shot an arrow, taking the life of a Fowler family soldier. Go to hell. Cullen's archery skills were extremely amazing. He shot out sharp arrows full of revenge and anger, washing them with the blood of the enemy. The scene of the war was extremely fierce. Not long ago, the Prince's Pass fell. Old Falcon only led a few soldiers to escape back to Shianji City. Then, relying on the geographical advantage of Shianji City and these few soldiers, they were resisting tenaciously. However, at this moment, the sound of the horn of retreat suddenly came from behind the royal army. It turned out that an army holding the flag of the Uller family of the Prison Gate Castle arrived not far away. They attacked the royal army, and John Clinton, the commander of the entire army, was forced to blow the horn, ordering the army to suspend the attack on Shianji City, and then retreated to the camp. The reinforcement from Shianji City have arrived. It seems that there are still many friends of the Fowler family. The middle-aged man with grey-red hair sat upright on the warhorse, wearing the medal of the King's Hand on his chest, which reflected the light slightly in the sun. His face was calm, without the slightest panic. Are they crazy? Dare to go against the Iron Throne? A general from the 2nd Legion from the continent of Essos beside John Clinton asked in confusion. He was a Roiner, but he did not regard these Dornishmen as his compatriots, because they were the Roiner who fled to Dorne with 10,000 ships across the narrow sea led by Nymeria. This involved many grievances of the ancient Roiner kingdom, which need not be elaborated. In the eyes of this Roiner general, the prince was the supreme existence, and these people dared to rebel against their prince, and they were obviously unable to win. He could not understand. Actually, there is nothing difficult to understand. They are Dornishmen. If you can guess the Dornishmen's thoughts, then you are one of them. John Connington sat on his warhorse. His voice was cold, and his words were full of discrimination against the Dornishmen. Although he and Oberyn were good friends, it still did not affect his bad impression of the Dornishmen. In fact, this is not difficult to understand, because John Connington was a Stormlander, his former fiefdom was in Griffin's Roost, and he had been the Earl of Griffin's Roost before he was deprived of his title by the Mad King. How could a noble from the Stormlands have a good impression of the Dornish? The two sides have been enemies for thousands of years. Perhaps they have enjoyed too much preferential treatment in the past few years, and have forgotten who is the master above their heads. Perhaps it is because they defeated the dragon hundreds of years ago, which gave them too much confidence. After Princess Rhaenys' first period, John Connington had urged Viserys to marry the Princess Royal several times, and believed that this was an unshirkable responsibility for His Majesty. Of course, he did not say who he was targeting, but just claimed that this was the tradition of the Targaryen family and the Dragon Riders of Valyria. If we learn from the historical lessons of the previous dynasty, and want the royal family to remain orthodox forever, we must let a prince with pure blood sit on the throne instead of confusing the bloodline. John Connington did not express it openly, but everyone with a discerning eye knew that he wanted to do his best to promote the new queen, to join the harem to replace and balance the status of Queen Arianne from Dorne. The Subra Baron wanted to object, but after thinking it over, he chose not to intervene in the palace disputes. He chose to watch from the sidelines and privately persuaded his old friend not to get too involved. because the royal palace disputes are often extremely cruel, and the killing is bloodless. And even if Viserys married Rhaenys, the little queen also has half of Dawn's blood, and Dawn's interests are still not damaged. Unfortunately, Jon Connington did not listen to Oberyn's sincere advice. It's time. Then, looking at the army flying the flag of Hellgate and more flags of Dawn nobles not far away, Jon Connington murmured slightly. Chapter 666, The Empire's Southern Tour. It's time. I didn't expect to catch so many people at once. In the sky, a grey-backed falcon was soaring in the sky, its grey-black eyes overlooking the battlefield on the ground, and then it rose with the wind. On the battlefield on the ground, on the wall of Shianji City, the old falcon Franklin Fowler watched the royal army slowly retreat and return to his camp. He couldn't help throwing away the blood-stained sword in his hand, and laughing up to the sky. Ha ha ha, our reinforcements are finally here. The armor on the body of the Earl of Shianji City was tattered, and his white beard was stained with blood. The soldiers of the Fowler family on the wall couldn't even laugh. They all sat on the ground, gasping for breath, and their eyes were full of relief for surviving the disaster. Shianji City was just about to be breached. Since the defeat at Prince's Pass, the Fowler family has only a few hundred soldiers left to hold on. If it weren't for the poor geographical conditions of Shianji City, which was extremely easy to defend and difficult to attack, it might have fallen long ago, and Earl Fowler was also escorted to King's Landing for trial. Fortunately, Franklin Fowler had a good relationship with people in Dawn, and more importantly, the policies of the Seven Kingdoms had caused a lot of dissatisfaction among the Dawn nobles. They wanted to take the opportunity to express their dissatisfaction. The royal army broke through the Prince's Pass and invaded Dawn, which touched the sensitive nerves of the Dawn nobles. Of course, they would not expect the Iron Throne to change its national policy to consider the feelings of the Dawn nobles. Although the nobles of Dawn were crazy, they were not brainless. They knew that it was impossible, and that would be tantamount to open rebellion. What awaited them would be the First and Second Dawn Wars, when the armies of the 6 countries attacked Dawn from multiple directions, killing people with blood and pestles, and winning the war at a very tragic price. Therefore, the Dornish nobles wanted to take advantage of the incident of old Franklin Fowler to express their dissatisfaction with the Iron Throne. Their only demand was that the lordship of the Riverlands repatriate those who had escaped from Dawn, and send them back to Dawn to be punished by local laws. Because they violated the laws made by local lords and nobles, and left their hometowns without permission, they were criminals on the Dornish side, and should return to their hometowns to be tried. In fact, they could not find any fault with the demands of the Dornish nobles. After all, Dawn was the special zone promised by Viserys himself. The special zone did not follow the changes in other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. In addition to being nominally subject to the Iron Throne, it actually still implemented a high degree of autonomy during the Old Noble period. Since it was a high degree of autonomy and still followed the traditions of the past, the Dornish nobles were qualified to make local laws. However, they obviously misjudged one point. That is, they were not as important and powerful as imagined in Viserys' heart. Although Dawn had helped him seize the Iron Throne, Viserys was certainly not an ungrateful person, but in the final analysis, the help and merits provided by Dawn to him were not enough for them to be so presumptuous. Moreover, the Dornish people's confidence has always come from the First Dornish War. They successfully resisted the attack of the Targaryen family and shot and killed the young Queen Rhaenys and her dragon Meryxes at the Hellgate. This war lasted from the 4th year of the Egan calendar to the 13th year of the Egan calendar. After nearly 10 years, an armistice agreement was reached. The Targaryen army withdrew from Dawn. Dawn paid a very heavy price to maintain its independence and freedom. This war gave the Dornish people enough confidence, which lasted for 300 years. Later Dornish people also believed that they could still resist the attack of the dragon like their ancestors. However, the lessons of history often tell people that no matter how powerful a country is, there will be a day when it will decline. The current Dornish army is not as fierce as their ancestors when they resisted the invasion. Viserys' war minister Cargo has now led his tribe to cross the poisonous water on a wooden horse and return to the continent of Essos. After the Second Conquest War, he used a very contemptuous word in the Dothraki language to describe the combat effectiveness of the Dornish army to Viserys, which was roughly equivalent to sheep. Because in the Battle of the Reach, during the attack and defense of Star Shuttle City, if the Dothraki howling warriors led by Cargo had not arrived in time and attacked the Reach army from behind, the Dorne army would have been almost annihilated by the Reach army led by Willis Tyrrell. The fighting ability of the Dorne army today is far from the bravery of their ancestors when they resisted the invasion. Their ancestors were able to tenaciously resist the dragon attacks of the Targaryen family, but it does not mean that they can do so. At the same time, in the distant King's Landing, Viserys, who had just been crowned as the first emperor of Valyria, boarded his dragon and prepared to tour the south alone. Viserys is a little like Egon in this regard. After unifying the 6 kingdoms, Egon liked to ride a dragon to patrol around. And Viserys' wife Irian held Diana's hand to see her husband off. "My love, no matter what, please forgive my father." The beautiful eyes of the Queen of Dawn were filled with tears, and she pulled her daughter who had just learned to run. As Viserys' bedside, she naturally knew what her husband was going to do on this southern tour. During this period of time, the war reports were telling about the war situation in Dawn. The war in Dawn was not optimistic. The old falcon, the Earl of Skyreach, was not going to kneel down and surrender, but was ready to resist to the end, and even gathered many nobles who were friendly with the Fowler family. The strength of the Fowler family itself was not weak. The Fowler family was the guardian of the pass. They were a large family under the Martell family and the guardian of the Bone Road Ironwood family, with many vassals. Even if the Martell family intervened, it could not completely quell the rebellion in Skyreach. After all, this was the drawback of traditional aristocratic rule. The king was a large nobleman, and the feudal lord was just a slightly large nobleman under him. Everyone still acted on their own. If it was in the common interest, they would listen to you, and if it was not in the common interest, they would do their own thing. Moreover, the Iron Throne wants old Fowler's head now. How could he plead guilty so easily? Of course, Irian. This matter has nothing to do with Prince Doran. Viserys' heart softened slightly when he heard his wife's words, and then he kissed her forehead gently, and then climbed on Balerian's back again. The huge black dragon turned his head and looked at the silver-haired little girl who was staggering on the ground. It knew that this was Viserys' daughter. Then it let out a low roar, and then suddenly exerted force on its hind legs, vibrated its wings, and rushed straight into the sky, flying towards the south of the Empire. Chapter 667 Negotiation. After the royal army retreated, the Dornish noble coalition did not pursue the victory. After all, their numbers were not much superior. This time, the rebellion in Dawn was only the activity of a few nobles, and it did not get the nod from Sunspear. Moreover, their pursuit was to ask the Iron Throne to repatriate those Dornish people who had fled to other places and return to the local area for trial, rather than really rebelling, so they did not dare to pursue too hastily. If this royal army was really destroyed in Dawn, their days would not be easy. Then, the coalition of Dornish nobles, led by the other family of Hellgate, entered the city of Shienji. "Welcome, Lord Harmonulla, my old friend." And the old falcon, Lord Franklin Fowler, changed into blood-stained armor and went out of the city to greet him in person. The flag of the Ulla family was a flame of yellow and crimson interlaced, and Hellgate was also located in the center of the Dornish desert, close to the source of the Sulphur River, which was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Most of the castles in Dawn are located in dangerous places. Therefore, when the Targaryen army entered Dawn during the First Dawn War 300 years ago, they faced so many difficult situations. Just going deep into the desert to fight is enough to discourage many soldiers. There are many difficulties in fighting in the desert, such as lack of water, exposure to the sun, and poisons. No matter how many lives are lost, they cannot be filled. Therefore, the Earl of Hellgate jumped out fearlessly, took the initiative to fight against the royal power, and supported the Earl of Sky City. After all, there is a saying among the people of Dawn: half of the people in the Ulla family are crazy, and the other half are worse. Humph, I once went to the Reach for the Iron Throne. I didn't expect that the yellow-mouthed boy would betray Dawn. The burly Earl of Hellgate, Harmonulla, with a little grey hair, turned over and jumped off his warhorse, and hugged his old friend. Don't worry, old friend. I won't let John Connington take you to King's Landing. The old falcon Franklin Fowler wiped his eyes pretending to be touched, but he didn't dare to respond to Harmonella's words. Everyone present knew who the young boy he was referring to. In fact, Franklin Fowler regretted killing someone, but he didn't want to be taken away directly like this, because he would definitely die when he arrived at King's Landing. So Franklin Fowler was forced to start a rebellion. In essence, he still wanted to reconcile with the Iron Throne, and still had a little fantasy in his heart. He didn't want to go down this path, so he didn't dare to respond to his old friend's words, and could only smile awkwardly. Ulrich. Long time no see. Then the old falcon cast his eyes on the middle-aged knight next to Harmonella, who was slightly younger than the two of them. His face was somewhat similar to Harmonella, and he was Sir Ulrich Uller, the younger brother of the Earl of Hellgate. Lord Franklin. The middle-aged knight had a calm face, holding the hilt of his sword with one hand. He also shook hands with the old falcon, then retreated behind his brother and stopped talking. Let's go into the city to discuss how to negotiate with John Connington, how to resolve this matter without offending Our Majesty. Then Franklin Fowler spoke up and made a gesture of invitation. I met John Connington when I was in King's Landing. He has a cold face all day long, a bad temper and is stubborn. He is not an easy person to deal with. Please. The coalition forces of the Dawn nobles held high the flags of each family and entered the city of Shianji, while those who could not enter the castle began to set up camp outside the city. The sound of horse hooves was noisy and chaotic, and the colorful flags fluttered in the wind. The Dawn soldiers were busy on the mountain, but in the Royal Army camp at the foot of the mountain, the atmosphere here was a little depressed. Lord John Connington. Excuse me. With the reinforcement from the Dawnish army coming, it is impossible for us to capture Skyreach. Sir Edwy Fossoway of the Sea Hall said, holding the hilt of his sword, and his brother Brian Fossoway also nodded in approval. That's right. The supplies are already out of stock. If we continue to waste time here, we may be surrounded by the Dawnish and be wiped out. In fact, John Connington's army only has 4,000 people. It is already very proud to be able to break through the Prince's Pass, the northern gate of Dawn, and attack the heart of Dawn. If the 4,000 people led by John only put down the rebellion of the Fowler family and escort the Earl of Skyreach to King's Landing for trial, it may be enough. But if other Dawnish nobles intervene in this war, their number is not enough. You must know that the Martel family of Sunspear has not yet expressed their position. They have neither sent troops to quell the rebellion, nor announced their support for the rebellion. If the Martel family suddenly joined the rebellion, they might never leave Dawn. Now the 2,000 Legion soldiers who followed John Connington from King's Landing are fine. Their morale is still high, and they have not retreated at all. Most of them come from the other side of the narrow sea, and are not afraid of the Dawnish. However, some of the local nobles in the Reach have already backed down. After all, they have crossed the Prince's Pass and penetrated deep into the heart of Dawn. If the Dawnish suddenly turn against them, they will not even have a chance to escape. Although it is a pity to stand up for the Senfold family, no one wants to die, let alone die for others. Therefore, they propose to the hand of the king to retreat to the Prince's Pass and then send an envoy to negotiate with Shianji City, asking Franklin Fowler to surrender. Or let John Connington ask for help from King's Landing and ask His Majesty to send more troops to Dawn while they wait for the arrival of reinforcement at the Prince's Pass. John Clinton, who was standing in front of the map of the Central Army tent, did not speak from beginning to end, his eyes overlooking the map below. When the nobles of the Reach finished speaking, and their eyes were all focused on him, the middle-aged man with grey-red hair finally raised his head, his eyes swept across every face present, and spoke in a calm voice. The Dawnish reinforcement are not much more than ours. The fact that they did not go out in full force means that they do not want to fight to the end for the Fowler family and the royal power. So if they dare to go out of the city to fight, we will take the opportunity to eat them. If they hide under the city of Shianji, we will accompany them to the end. I have sent a letter to King's Landing to ask His Majesty for help. Perhaps the dragon will arrive soon. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. we cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 668, Beheading the Envoy. Then, it turned out to be, just as John Connington had expected. Even though the Fowler family, the other family of Hellgate, and the Codgel family of Sandston City had gathered in the City of Sky and Heaven, the total strength of the Dawn rebel nobles was not weaker than that of the Royal Army, and even a little bit more. However, they huddled under the City of Sky and Heaven without any intention of attacking and expelling the Royal Army from Dawn. Instead, they sent envoys to negotiate with John Connington. Dawn is ancient and glorious. The Kingdom of Dawn existed as early as the Dance of Dragons in Valyria. The conquerors all suffered a bloody defeat under the walls of Dawn. We are not so easily defeated. After the Dawn envoys arrived at the tent, they arrogantly put forward a series of demands to the King's Hand of the Iron Throne. The first one was to require the Reach and the Royal Army to make reasonable compensation for the losses caused by the invasion of Dawn, with a total price of no more than 100,000 gold dragons. The second one was to clear the connection between Earl Franklin Fowler and the tragedy of the Zenford family. The messenger claimed that Lord Franklin did not go to Ashford to take revenge that day, but secretly went to take revenge without telling Sir Owen, and killed the family of Earl Zenford. Franklin Fowler was also furious after hearing this. He was willing to apologize for this, and hang all the participants, a total of more than 30 people, and then send the bodies to Lord Zenford as an explanation. But he himself was unwilling to go to King's Landing to confess his guilt. He wanted to admit his guilt and reach a private reconciliation with the nobles of the River Bay. This was also the most common solution to conflicts between nobles in the past 7 kingdoms. If a reconciliation can be reached privately, the Iron Throne will turn a blind eye and be unwilling to meddle in other people's affairs. After all, it is better to have less trouble than more. Because conflicts and fights between nobles are very common, the Iron Throne could not manage them in the past. The third is a collective demand of many Dornish nobles who came to Sky City to rescue. They demanded the repatriation of all Dornish people who fled to the outside world and brought them back to their hometown for trial. After all, now that the Gate of Prince's Pass has been opened, many people in the territory have fled to the Reach to live a good life. Dawn has hot weather and harsh climate, while the climate in the Reach is suitable and the land is fertile. The power of the nobles has been greatly reduced. They dare not use lynching or run rampant in the countryside, and the most important thing is that the tax is minimal. After the people have paid their taxes, there is still a lot of food left, which can be sold to merchants to earn more silver deer and improve the lives of their families. This is the life that people yearn for. Therefore, the Reach is the most populous region in Westeros, even several times more than the North, which occupies half of Westeros. Although other places in the 7 kingdoms are not as rich as the Reach, they are not much different because of the overall changes, and the population flow is not obvious. Therefore, it is not difficult to understand that the people of Dawn, who are still living a hard life in Westeros, are willing to flee to the Reach with their families to live a life that people should live. If you want blood, the 7 kingdoms will be filled with blood. But why? The Dornish envoy was arrogant and put forward 3 unacceptable conditions in a row. In fact, the envoy wearing the coat of arms of the Coggle family of Sandston City was not a fool. He was Aron Coggle, the second son of Earl Quentin Coggle. He naturally knew that John Connington would definitely not accept these conditions, but hasn't this been the way negotiations have been since ancient times, asking for a high price and paying back the money? However, Aron Coggle was still waiting for John Connington, the Hand of the King of the Iron Throne, to pay back the money, but he didn't expect that the other party would not pay back the money, but instead waited for the other party's butcher knife. The Iron Throne will never compromise with traitors. Come here. Take him out and behead him. Hang his head in front of the camp for the barbarians on the mountain to see. John Connington's face was cold. He did not refute the conditions proposed by the Dornish envoy. Instead, he waved his hand and ordered the guards on both sides to take the second son of Sandston out and chop off his head and then hang it in front of the camp gate for public display. What? The Dornish envoy Aron Coggle was also shocked. He did not expect that the other party would not play according to common sense. This is not in line with the rules of negotiation. Who would negotiate without bargaining, but directly cut someone? However, he still did not panic too much. He stubbornly believed that the other party was just trying to scare him. After all, it was a default rule that the two armies did not cut the envoys when fighting. I'm not scared, Lord John Connington. You'd better let me go quickly, otherwise my father. However, when the guards of the Prime Minister Tower brought by John Connington from King's Landing escorted Aaron Codgel outside the tent, the Dornish envoy seemed to realize that the other party was not joking, let alone scaring him, and then hurriedly shouted in fear, Lord John Connington, I'm the envoy of Dawn, and envoys are not killed when the two armies are fighting. But John Connington still had a cold face and had no intention of calling the guards back, while the executioner of the other legion had already put on a smock to prevent blood from splashing. Dung, a tree stump was placed on the open ground in the camp, and the sticky board for beheading was placed on the tree stump, and then a wine jug was taken from a soldier beside him, and a big sip was taken. Pooh. Then the executioner sprayed alcohol on the sword with his mouth, and the clear wine slowly flowed down the cold blade. He coldly looked at the Dornish envoy who was pushed over and pressed on the sticky board by his shoulders, then leaned his sword on the ground and made the last prayer before beheading. My Lord Prime Minister, Lord John Connington. However, at this moment, the second son of Sandston City was frightened. He looked at the executioner with a fierce face and the sword in his hand in horror. Then he shouted incoherently, blurting out all the secret words of his father and Erlala and others. No compensation. No compensation. The first and second clauses can be negotiated. In fact, the Dornish nobles only care about the third clause the most, because it is related to their interests, and the first two clauses are purely added for negotiation. What does the life and death of old Earl Fowler have to do with them? Although they call each other old friends in front of Shianji City, in fact, everyone has a calculation in their hearts. If John Connington insisted on taking Franklin Fowler to King's Landing for trial and to give an explanation to His Majesty, as long as he agreed to the third condition, these Dornish nobles would not mind helping them to arrest people. As for the compensation issue, it was nonsense. These were all conditions for John Connington to bargain. They had never thought about asking for any compensation. They only cared about the third condition. However, Aaron Coggle shouted and revealed all the details his father had told him, but it still did not change John Connington's mind. The nobles of the River Reach in the tent were terrified and shut their mouths and dared not make any sound. Who would have thought that this prime minister who looked like a good man would kill people if he said so? On the other side, the executioner had raised his sword high, and then he raised his sword and the head of the Dornish envoy fell to the ground. Chapter 669. The Dragon Attacks. In Skyland, when Quentin Coggle, the Earl of Sandston, saw the head of his second son Aaron being hung in front of the military camp, he could no longer bear it. He smashed the wine glass in his hand and stood up suddenly. My son. Quentin Coggle wanted to avenge his son, and beside his father, Gian Coggle, the heir of Sandston, also stood up with his sword hilt full of sadness and anger on his face. I want to avenge my brother. I will chop off John Connington's head and send it to King's Landing. I will tell Viserys in person. We Dornishmen are not so easy to bully. Seeing the father and son of the Coggle family of Sandston City were furious, the other Dornish nobles in the Hall of Skyland hurriedly stood up and persuaded them. Lord Quentin. Lord Quentin. Sir Gullion. Calm down our anger for now. We can avenge Aaron, but we can't kill John Connington. Lord Harmonulla of Prison Gate, known as the Madman, became the calmest person at this moment. He winked at his brother Ulrich, asking him to stop the eldest son Gullion of Sandston. After everyone stood up and grabbed the father and son of Codgel, Harmonulla continued to speak. If we kill John Connington, there will really be no way out. The Martel family will not let us go either. Harmonulla said. His two words calmed the father and son of Sandston in an instant, and their minds, which had just been overwhelmed by anger, became much clearer. John Connington must not die, otherwise the Iron Throne, and any room for maneuver they had before would be gone. At that time, the Martel family may not choose to stand on their side, and if the Martel family of Prince Dawn also stands on the side of the Iron Throne, then their rebellion this time will undoubtedly fail, and their heads are destined to hang on the top of King's Landing. Although his son was killed, and Quentin was furious, he still didn't want to die. Quentin Coggle calmed down, but his eldest son Gullion was still a little indignant. If the Martel family stands on the side of the enemy, then he is not my prince. As soon as Gullion Coggle's voice came out, all the Dornish nobles present changed their faces. The Martel family has a deep grasp of Dorne. Although Prince Doran has been sitting in the flowing water palace for decades, his prestige is still there. It was only after the death of Prince Luwin Martell of the Kingsguard and Princess Celia Martell that it declined slightly. Some people questioned Prince Doran's courage. Why didn't he dare to avenge his uncle and sister? But no one dared to disobey the Martell family openly. However, they were exposed by Gullion Coggle in public, which made the Dorne nobles present look uncertain. Be careful with your words. The Martell family is our prince. Gullion Coggle's voice fell and everyone was silent. Then Gullion was scolded by his father. The heir of Sandston City also knew that he had said the wrong thing. His face turned red and white. He nodded slightly, but he didn't dare to say anything. For now, we still have to avenge our nephew Aaron. The room was silent. Finally, the owner of this place, the white-haired old Franklin Fowler, the Earl of Chien-Jicheng, spoke in a hoarse voice. After all, John Connington went too far and killed the envoy we sent out. If we don't fight back strongly, the morale of the soldiers will also be hit. Franklin Fowler felt that the whole thing was getting out of control. He just wanted to survive. This was his only request after the impulsive murder. He realized his mistake. He should not have led the troops to break through Ashford personally. Instead, he pushed the responsibility onto his soldiers as he had told Aaron. He knew nothing about anything. He was willing to pay the price for his mistake. He was willing to pay for everything, except losing his head and being sent to the border to guard the wall. Unfortunately, he made a series of arrangements for his life and freedom, but after a struggle, he found that things were getting out of control. He thought that John Connington would choose to negotiate with him after he had the support of other Dornish nobles, and he was relieved for this. But he didn't expect John Connington to be so ruthless and selfless. He claimed that there was no negotiation between him and the traitor, and he directly pushed the envoy out and killed him. This made the situation, which had been turning around, fall into a deadlock again. Is there only one way to go? Total rebellion. However, the Dorne nobles in the main hall of Chien-Ji City were clamoring and claiming to avenge Aaron Coggle, while the cunning old falcon was thinking wildly. Woo woo woo. Suddenly, the loud sound of horns rang out from the top of the city of Kangshan City. The sound shook people's blood and made people's blood boil. It spread far away. What's going on? John Clinton dared to send people to attack the city? The Dorne nobles in the main hall of Chien-Ji City were in an uproar. A horn sound is a sign of enemy attack, but who are their enemies? Is John Clinton crazy? Dare to use such a small number of people to attack Chien-Ji City? You must know that including the family of Hellgate Castle and the family of Sandston City, the number of troops in Chien-Ji City is no less than the number of soldiers led by John Clinton, and even more than the enemy. However, just as they were wondering, a desolate and long dragon roar suddenly came from above their heads. Ho! This roar, like the roar of an ancient beast, made people tremble all over. As soon as it opened its mouth, it suppressed all the horn sounds on the top of the city wall of Chien-Ji, making them pale in comparison. What is this sound? In the castle hall, the Dornish nobles looked up and did not react at first. Dragon then Gullion Coggle, who had just shouted the most fiercely to avenge his brother, seemed to react first. He murmured softly, "Is it a dragon?" He turned his head uncertainly and looked at the people around him, including his father, and then saw everyone's face change drastically. Dragon. It's a dragon. Run. But it was too late. Balerion, the black dragon that covered the sky and the sun, shook his wings and swooped down from the sky to the ground, roaring. The soldiers of the Fowler family on the wall of Chien-Ji raised their bows and shot, but it was like scratching an itch. Pa. The arrow hit the dragon's increasingly thick and rough scales and bounced back to the ground. Then Balerion opened his abyssal mouth and aimed at the castle below. A touch of indigo light emerged from the center of his throat. Chapter 670 Breaking the City. Boom. The surging dragon flames poured down, instantly collapsing the roof of the castle, and a large number of flames mixed with bricks and rubble suddenly rushed in. The unknown Dornish soldiers screamed and were drowned in the dragon flames. Some were instantly melted into ashes, and some lay on the ground twisting their bodies, trying to extinguish the flames on their bodies. Help! Help! Others jumped directly from the city wall and ended their pain by suicide. In the castle of Shianji City, the eaves above their head were shattered, and many Dornish nobles inside did not even have time to react, and they were killed and injured in an instant. Hot. The rolling heat baked people's bodies, as if they were in a furnace, and the surrounding air instantly became dry, and all the moisture was swept away. Franklin Fowler, Earl of Shianji City, was one of the ones who reacted faster, and he was also lucky. When the ceiling of the hall was suddenly destroyed by the dragon flame, a huge brick and stone fell down, smashing a warrior of the Blemont family into a pulp in front of him, but he was unharmed, and quickly hid under the table to escape. Hoo-hoo at this moment, old Franklin was panting heavily, hiding under the table, and looking at everything around him in horror. However, everywhere he looked, there were rising flames, and broken bricks and rubble. The city where the Fowler family, the king of the Sky of Dawn, had lived for generations had been opened up with a huge wound. When he looked up, he could directly see the blue sky and the diffused smoke. Balerion made a low and powerful dragon roar, constantly shaking his wings and spewing dragon flames around the castle of humans below. Since the end of the Second Conquest War, it has been a long time since it has had the opportunity to kill like this. However, this time Balerion released all the breath he had been holding back. Rumble, it flapped its wings to its heart's content, squandering its dragon flames. The surging indigo-colored flames destroyed the buildings in Shianji City. The broken roofs of the castle and the towering towers collapsed in the wailing. The pigsty, stables, armory, library, etc. in Shianji City were all ignited by the dragon flames, and the entire castle was engulfed in a sea of fire. Balerion roared, vibrated his wings, and flew into the sky again. The dragon flame it spewed was red at first, but now with the growth of age and size, it is becoming more and more dark. The dragon suddenly fell from the sky, and the royal army at the foot of the mountain outside the city would naturally not miss such an opportunity. John Clinton's letter for help had just been sent out not long ago, and he did not expect the dragon to arrive so quickly. You know, the raven may not have flown over the Prince's Pass yet. Could it be that His Majesty had seen the situation here when he was in King's Landing? However, such a bold idea only flashed through his mind, and he did not dare to speculate further. It was still a rumor that Viserys mastered mysterious magic, but it was a secret known to almost everyone among the ministers and high officials of the Iron Throne. Then the middle-aged man with grey-red hair looked at the dragons flying in the sky and the city of Sky and Sky that was submerged in the sea of fire. He did not get on his horse, but directly drew the long sword at his waist, pointed it at the distant city wall and roared, "Your Majesty, lead the army in person. Capture this city. Kill all the traitors. Kill." The noble coalition led by the King of the River Bay and the soldiers of the 2nd Legion who came from King's Landing roared in unison, and then rushed towards Sky and Sky. John Clinton also led the way, not riding a warhorse, because the geographical conditions of Sky and Sky were bad, located on the top of the mountain, and the road was broken and bumpy, so he was forced to rush forward on foot with a long sword in hand. Kill. The dark mass of royal soldiers held up the ladder, and attacked Sky and Sky. The city of Sky was now submerged in a sea of fire. There was no need to use ladder, because his city gate and a section of the city wall had been collapsed by the dragon's flames, turning into ruins all over the ground. At this moment, the air on the battlefield was also full of heat, and there were burning flames everywhere. Although the dragon had already flown away, and no longer spewed dragon flames, most of the Dawn soldiers in the city had lost the courage to resist. They kept running and shouting, making shrill cries for help. "Water, water, water, save me, save me." Many soldiers were still burning with flames. They were looking forward to rain at this moment, but in Dawn's hot and dry climate, it rained very rarely every year. In the end, they failed to put out the flames on their bodies, and could only fall to the ground with despair, while running with their last remaining strength, turning into a charred corpse. Kill. Then the king's soldiers rushed into the city, like a crushing force, unstoppable. With the help of the dragon, they directly defeated the morale of the Dawn soldiers, swept away the haze of the previous few days of hard siege, and killed all the enemies that appeared in their eyes like gods. Now the whole city of Shianji was filled with smoke and flames. Only a few Dawn soldiers were still resisting stubbornly, but how could they stop the king's soldiers who were so powerful? The dragon in the sky was afraid of accidentally injuring its own soldiers. At this moment, it had raised its altitude and hovered in the sky, constantly making low roars and overlooking the entire battlefield. Not far away, Viserys stood on a small hill and calmly watched the entire battlefield. In fact, this was a fishing operation. All the Dawn nobles who were dissatisfied with the Iron Throne were fished out in one breath. After all, their dissatisfaction would sooner or later erupt if they were hidden in their hearts. It is better to pack them all up and solve them now. Dawn's problems need to be solved sooner or later, otherwise Westeros without Dawn will be incomplete. However, the Dawnish people are stubborn. They can be united in the face of aggression, which is the most difficult problem. Viserys first started from a political perspective, disintegrating the relationship between the Dawnish nobles and the people, resulting in the current situation of division and confrontation between the Dawnish nobles and the people. Then he found an excuse to start a war. The incident of the Zenford family was actually just an accident. Because if you really want to incorporate Dawn into the system of the Empire, it is impossible to rely on the temptation of high interests without going through a war. Such Dawnish people will never surrender willingly. However, at this moment, an accident suddenly occurred. Chapter 671. Jon is assassinated. Kill. Jon Connington led the way, holding a long sword, and rushing into the city of Shianji. Save me. Please, save me. As soon as he entered the city gate, a Dawn soldier wearing a helmet and sandy leather armor, holding a spear and a shield in his hands rushed towards him, his body burning with flames, and he wailed in pain. Bang, but Jon Connington did not save him, but kicked him to the ground with a cold face. Puff, then he stepped forward and pierced his throat with a sword, and blood flowed out instantly, dyeing the ground under him red, ending all his pain for him. Lord Jon Connington, you shouldn't be here. Clang clang clang. The battlefield of Shianji City was full of thick smoke and billowing flames, the sound of weapons colliding and sporadic screams. Although the dragon blasted open the gate of Shianji City and defeated the courage of the Dawn soldiers to resist, the battlefield in the city was still not peaceful, and battles were taking place everywhere. Jon Connington, as the commander of the whole army, was indeed a little too frivolous to appear in this position. A guard of the Prime Minister's tower he brought from King's Landing, holding a bloody long sword, chopped down a Dawn soldier. His face was also blackened by the flames and smoke, but he still protected his master, then turned his head and said in a worried voice, "It's too dangerous here. You should step back." However, the grey red-haired man wearing the medal of the king's hand did not care and still waved his hand with a cold face and said, "It doesn't matter. The enemy is already a dog who has lost his home." There is a folk proverb in Westeros, which roughly means that, if a general cannot lead by example, what qualifications does he have to ask the soldiers to be brave? And Jon Connington often regards it as his own code of conduct. In the Battle of the Bells, he led by example, personally chopped down Duke Hoster Tully, almost killing him directly, and beheaded Denisarin, the heir of the Vale, which directly led to the lack of successors to the Duke of the Vale. He is not good at speaking, but good at doing things, and he abides by his honor. Therefore, his persistence and silence are often regarded as a sign of arrogance and indifference. Go. Find and capture all the members of the Fowler family, including the criminal Franklin Fowler, who violated the laws of the kingdom. But remember not to harm their lives. Jon Clinton then ordered his guards. He specifically told his soldiers not to kill innocent people indiscriminately, so as not to cause greater hatred. The Zenford family suffered a tragedy. Now, in order to uphold justice and the laws of the kingdom, they led the soldiers to bring the criminals to justice, and then wiped out the Fowler family. In this way, the hatred accumulated by you killing me, and I killing you. When will the revenge end? Therefore, Jon Clinton has always claimed that he will only pursue the sins of the head of the crime, and will not implicate his family. The father's guilt has nothing to do with his daughter. Yes. The guards of the Prime Minister's tower from King's Landing heard the order of their master, nodded hurriedly, and were about to walk to the other side. However, at this moment, something strange happened. The roof of the castle hall had collapsed and turned into a ruin. Only two lonely half-high walls were still standing, and they were still burning with flames and emitting thick black smoke. In the ruins, a man with curly dark hair, brown skin, and black and red spots on his face, which were obviously burned by fire, looked at John Connington with hatred. Then he drew his bow and arrow with trembling hands and tried to aim at the middle-aged man with grey-red hair. The leather armor he was wearing had been burned, and there were 3 scorpion emblems on his chest. The rough clothes had been worn out, and his fingers were black and bloody. The strong stinging made him lose consciousness several times, but he still gritted his teeth and tried to aim. On the other side, the defenseless John Connington was still explaining something to his guards. Control all members of the Fowler family, including the Dawn nobles who later participated in the war. Let them accept the trial of the kingdom's laws, and don't use lynching, and then waved his hand. Go. However, at this moment, bang, the sound of the bowstring was drowned in the noisy and chaotic sounds of the battlefield. A cold arrow pierced through the thick black smoke and flames, and then suddenly penetrated John Connington's chest. Puff, blood spurted out instantly. John Connington was caught off guard by the enemy's sudden cold arrow and fell in a pool of blood. The royal soldiers who rushed into Shianji City were stunned for a moment, and then there was an uproar. In the distance, Viserys was originally surveying the entire battlefield, and the black dragon Balerion also fell from the sky and returned to his side. However, at this moment, a picture suddenly flashed in his eyes, and his face suddenly changed. It's bad. He has a fragmented precognitive ability. He predicted the scene of John Connington's assassination in advance, but now it is close at hand, but it is too late. Lord John Connington. Lord John Connington. The Prime Minister was assassinated. On the other side, the royal soldiers were in an uproar. The nobles and knights of the Reach who followed John Connington and rushed into the Sky City suddenly felt their scalps tingling when they saw this scene. It's bad. It's trouble. As the name suggests, the hand of the king is the king's left and right arm, but the hand of the king was suddenly assassinated. How angry would King Viserys be? They didn't dare to imagine the next scene. Once the king was angry, there would be corpses everywhere. The Dornish people would probably be in trouble, and the best outcome for them was not to be implicated. Meester. Meester. Quick. The Meester with the Meester chain around his neck hurried over to rescue John Connington, who was shot and fell to the ground. Catch the murderer. Catch the murderer. Don't let anyone go. The knights of the Reach who came to their senses roared angrily, venting all their anger on these poor Dornish soldiers. Just now they were still receiving some captives who surrendered, but when John Connington was assassinated, the scene changed instantly. Go to hell. All the soldiers of the royal army had red eyes, and they raised their butcher knives without hesitation, and began to kill. Kill them all. Puff puff puff, the soldiers of the royal army started to kill, and the Dornish soldiers were in big trouble. The battle was already one-sided, and now it was even more overwhelming. The Dornish soldiers who had surrendered were also cut in the throat, and the Dornish soldiers who did not surrender did not even have the chance to surrender. Those who resisted stubbornly were pierced by several spears and fell in a pool of blood. Chapter 672 Death. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. The Battle of Shianji City finally came to an end in the afterglow of the setting sun. Rustling, Viserys appeared on the battlefield, and he slowly walked towards this side step by step. Crash, the black cloak fixed on his shoulders with a metal dragon head metal fluttered slightly in the wind, making a sound. Boom, his partner, the black dragon Balerion, landed heavily on the edge of the broken wall of Shianji City, raising a rolling wave of air and dust. It raised its huge and ferocious head, and a pair of terrifying scarlet eyes looked down at the little ones below. Then it opened its abyss mouth and suddenly let out a deafening roar that spread far away. It could feel the anger in Viserys' heart. Roar, crash, the dragon roared, and the royal soldiers and the nobles of the River Bay who made way for Viserys were all terrified, and immediately knelt on one knee, and a large group of them knelt down densely. Some of them had seen Viserys, while others had not. They had originally thought that His Majesty had only sent his mount to fight, but they had not expected that His Majesty would personally lead the army and ride a dragon to dawn to quell the rebellion. And the anxiety in their hearts just now was even more frightening now, because no one knew what would happen next when Viserys knew that his former prime minister had died. Today, the city of Shianji is in ruins. The fire in the city has not yet been extinguished. The thick smoke is still floating, and the bodies of Dawn soldiers are lying all over the ground. However, the royal soldiers and the Knights of the Reach knelt on one knee in the middle of the corpses. All of them did not dare to raise their heads, looking at the charred land under them. Their throats rolled, and they swallowed a mouthful of saliva. At the end of the passage that the Knights of the Reach made way for was a corpse placed on a door panel. There was no stretcher here, let alone a coffin. There was only a door panel found from the ruins, and the body was placed on it first. There was not even a white cloth to cover the body, and only a corner of a flag covered the cheek. The corpse was wearing a golden medal of the king's hand on his chest. It should have reflected a dazzling light under the setting sun, but the medal was already stained with a large amount of blood from its owner, losing the luster and glory of gold. Viserys walked slowly to the corpse, and the strong wind on the top of the mountain gently blew his hair. There was no anger or other emotions on the face of the silver-haired young man. Perhaps he had hidden all his emotions. Yeah. Then he nodded slightly to a guard of the Prime Minister's tower beside him and gestured. Yes, Your Majesty. The other party knelt on one knee and quickly climbed up to remove the cloth on John Connington's face for Viserys, revealing his cheek. At this moment, his eyes were slightly closed, and his grey-red beard was still stained with blood, but his face was pale, without the slightest blood color, and his body was already cold. John Connington's fire had been extinguished. Viserys had seen this result from the prophecy. His prophetic ability was full of too many uncontrollable things, and there were often only some fragmented fragments. If he had known this earlier, he would never have let John Connington come to Dawn. However, it was too late to say this now. He just had the last fantasy, but John Connington was indeed dead, and even the Black Mist could not save him. John. Viserys' eyes narrowed slightly, and his 5 fingers in leather gloves clenched for a moment. Who could have thought that after the general situation was determined, John Connington would actually capsize in this small ditch? However, accidents in this world always come unexpectedly. John Connington suppressed a bear-in and led the troops to the battle personally, but he did not expect that it would be his swan song, and he would never be able to return to King's Landing from then on. On the other side. Come here. Hurry up. The war came to an end, and the royal army completely captured Shianji City. There was no resistance in the castle anymore. The soldiers found the surviving Dawn nobles from the ruins. Most of them were dead or wounded, and only a few were still alive. However, they had been roasted half to death by the dragon flames, and were dying when they were found, including Franklin Fowler, the master of Skyreach. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The royal soldiers escorted the captives to Viserys, and then pressed their shoulders to make them all kneel on the ground. Your Majesty, the murderer is this man. The royal soldiers found the culprit of the hidden arrow wounding, a young man whose hair and leather armor were burnt, and his face was red and black. He was Gullion Cordial, the heir of Sandston. Gullion Cordial was lucky enough not to be hit when the dragon flames collapsed the roof of the castle hall, and then he saw John Connington, the murderer who killed his brother. Then he was blinded by hatred, and in order to avenge his brother, he secretly drew his bow and shot John Connington with a cold arrow. However, he woke up at this moment, looking at the body of John Connington lying on the ground, and was also shrouded in regret and fear. Your Majesty, spare me. Your Majesty, spare me. The other Dornish nobles who were escorted here trembled, as if they saw a devil, when they saw Viserys, and they kowtowed like pounding garlic, wanting to beg for mercy. Many of them had seen Viserys in person during the public trial in King's Landing, but they did not expect to see him again only a year later. But this time they were prisoners waiting for trial below. Your Majesty, I'm willing to plead guilty. I'm willing to plead guilty. Among this group of Dornish nobles, the old falcon with grey hair and beard, the protagonist of this incident, Franklin Fowler, the Earl of Skyreach, had blood all over his face. He knew that he would not be able to escape the guilt after seeing Viserys, and now he only hoped to be able to survive. Your Majesty, I'm willing to plead guilty. I'm willing to wear black clothes and go to the border of the wall. Franklin Fowler no longer hoped to escape the guilt, but only hoped to get the qualification to wear black clothes. However, this matter is no longer the main point. The death of the Prime Minister on the battlefield is the real big deal. Gian Cordial, the murderer, was pale and bloodless, just like John Connington, who was lying on the ground. He opened his mouth and wanted to beg for mercy or to justify his actions, but he didn't know whether it was because of fear or other reasons, so he didn't say anything. He is the only one left in the Cordial family of Sandston City. His father Quentin Cordial had just been burned to death by dragon flames. If he died again, the Cordial family of Sandston City would be officially destroyed and withdraw from the stage of history. Kill them all. However, Viserys only raised his head and looked at them, and then lightly said such a sentence, which determined their fate. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. All the captured or nobles were panicked, but Viserys ignored them and turned away. However, at this moment, in the field of vision that others could not see, a black mist emerged from John Connington's body. It seemed to be attracted by some characteristics of Viserys, and went directly into his body. Viserys paused as he was walking out, then turned sideways, and looked at Jon's body. Chapter 673 Jon's Soul. This is Jon's soul. In the military camp at the foot of Shianji Mountain. That night, Viserys guarded the soul of the most loyal king's hand under his command. The soldiers of the army went to cut down several trees, and use the best wood to build a temporary coffin for John Connington. At this moment, the body of the Prime Minister lay quietly in the coffin, and Viserys' sword dusk was placed beside him. Dawn's climate is hot. Although the temperature difference between day and night is huge, the climate during the day is too hot, and the body will rot in less than half a day. Viserys' sword dusk is taken from the heart of the Red Comet. It will have a burning effect when it kills the enemy, but except for Viserys, others will feel bone-chilling cold when holding this magic weapon. Melisandre, a priestess of the Red God, explained that the star heart of the Red Comet was a gift from the Lord Ruler to Viserys, so others would feel bone-chilling cold when they touched it, and it was almost impossible to hold it. Only Viserys could use and wield it freely without feeling the cold. She claimed that Viserys was the son of the sun, the reincarnation of the hero Azor Ahai, but only Viserys knew that he was not the reincarnation of anyone, let alone the son of the Sunday. Now Viserys took advantage of the characteristics of dusk and placed it next to John Connington. He used the coldness of the magic weapon to suppress the corruption of the corpse and was able to escort John's body back to his hometown. Although it was only midnight, John Connington's body remained unchanged, as if it was really frozen from the inside out. As for the battlefield during the day, the Shianji city, known as the City of the Sky, has now completely turned into a ruin. John Connington was assassinated, which caused Viserys' rare anger. He ordered all troops to withdraw from Skyreach, and all the captured Dornish nobles and Gian Cordial, the murderer of John Connington, were tied up in the center of the castle. Then Viserys ordered his partner, the Black Dragon Balerion, to destroy the ancient castle that had stood on the earth for thousands of years with dragon fire, completely razing it to the ground, leaving only some ruins. Skyreach, the Fowler family, the Cordial family of Sandston, and the Uller family of Hellgate all disappeared in the long river of history. The twins of the Fowler family were spared because they were girls, and all the other male heirs were burned alive. The same was true for the Cordial family of Sandston. One of the male heirs was beheaded by John Connington, and the other was burned alive. Earl Harmon Uller of the Uller family of Hellgate was killed by a boulder falling from the ceiling, and his heir and brother, Sir Ulrich Uller, was burned to death by dragon fire. The Uller family only left behind an illegitimate daughter, who was now in King's Landing. She was a baron's mistress, named Illyria Sand, and she gave birth to 4 daughters for a baron. In addition, the twins of the Fowler family, as well as Illyria Sand, were all deprived of their inheritance rights and demoted to commoners. However, now, the night was deep. The silver-haired young man sat alone in the makeshift morning hall, holding John Connington's coffin. There was silence all around. The wind blew the white curtains of the morning hall and made a rustling sound. There was not even a guard outside the door, and Viserys drove them all away. At this moment, a hazy black mist appeared in his palm. This black mist looked extremely light and kept changing into various forms, as if it had its own consciousness. Viserys knew that this was John Connington's soul. Since Viserys absorbed the power of the old gods and the three-eyed crow Brynden rivers, his mental power has reached the last half step close to the peak. Now he no longer needs to collect lives and souls by himself. He only needs to stay in the Red Keep in King's Landing. All the dead souls within a radius of dozens of miles will be attracted by him and then gathered together. This is why he has rarely left King's Landing in recent years. John Connington's soul leaving his body means that he is completely dead and there is no possibility of resurrection. If his body is out of the suppression of dusk, it may begin to show signs of corruption in a few hours. However, Viserys is now thinking about whether John Connington's soul has other opportunities. Can I talk to the souls of the dead? Maybe there will be other opportunities? Viserys looked at the light black mist in his palm, and his cheeks showed a moment of thinking. However, he didn't know what to do now. After all, the road ahead was unfamiliar to him. Without a reference, he could only continue to cross the river by feeling the stones. But Viserys did have someone to consult. In that case, the regret of Meryxes, the sea god of the Valyrians. She knew a lot of things and might be able to provide Viserys with some help. But unfortunately, she was not brought with him at the moment, and he had to wait until Viserys returned to King's Landing to ask her, including the matter of the giant white crow skull, which should be put on the agenda in time. The nameless statue with weaker divinity contained the remnant of Meryxes. He was somewhat looking forward to what was hidden in the white skull. But the most important thing at the moment was John Connington's soul. Viserys carefully collected it to prevent it from being mixed with other absorbed black mists, otherwise there would be no means of communication, and even Viserys would not be able to tell who each of them was. This was an opportunity Viserys had never thought of developing in this direction before, but John Connington's unexpected death made him cast his eyes on the link of human life and death for the first time. Can he communicate with the dead? Viserys didn't know, but this was the only thing he could do at the moment. The next morning, a hazy new sun slowly rose from the east, and there were still sporadic flames that had not been extinguished on the ruins of Shianji City, and the black smoke had not yet dissipated. Now everyone in the royal army felt heavy-hearted, including the nobles of the king's territory in the River Reach. The entire army dismantled their tents and escorted the coffin of the former Prime Minister John Connington back to the River Reach. However, they were a little worried while riding on their war horses. Let's go. They defeated their old rivals and enemies, but the result was not what they wanted. The castle was razed to the ground, the heirs were all killed, and only the girls who were deprived of the castle were left. Their fate was predictable. No noble would dare to take the risk to marry them, even if their blood was equally noble. In the end, they could only marry commoners or become prostitutes. Chapter 674, Flying Book Yangji City. The rebellion of Skian City was finally ended under the raging dragon flames, and the castle and 3 ancient Dawn families officially withdrew from the stage of history. The royal army also escorted John Connington's coffin along the road and slowly retreated towards the direction of Prince's Pass. The surrounding Dawn families were all terrified, and the Blackman family of Blackman City escaped. Not long ago, Lady Aurora could not resist the persuasion and finally chose to follow the crowd to send troops to Skian City. However, the Blackman family only had women and teenagers left. Her daughter Janissa and son Penrose were still young, so they naturally could not go to the battle in person. They just entrusted the warriors under the family to lead hundreds of soldiers to symbolically show their intention. Fortunately, Viserys did not settle accounts with the Blackman family. The same was true for the Manwarddy family of Kingsgrave. They stood on the side of the Fowler family in the Battle of Prince's Pass. Although they did not directly send soldiers, they transported a lot of supplies to help the Fowler family guard Prince's Pass. However, Dickon Manwarddy, the second son of Lord Daggoth of the Barrow City, was captured by the royal army in the Battle of Prince's Pass, and was even used to trick the gate of the pass open, so Dickon was also considered to have made meritorious contributions. After the royal army entered the pass, John Connington kept the promise made by the 50 warriors to Dickon, forgave the sins of the Manwarddy family, and let him go. Therefore, the Manwarddy family of the Barrow City also escaped. Viserys did not accompany the army to retreat. He escorted John Connington's coffin and wrote a letter on the march. The whole letter was not long. After writing it, he blew it, and then neatly folded it, and stuffed it into the envelope. A lump of dark red seal mud fell on the envelope. The silver-haired young man took off the metal emblem of the three-headed dragon on his left chest that was used to hold his cloak, and then gently pressed it on the seal mud, leaving the emblem of the Targaryen family. Then he handed the letter to the Maester who accompanied the army. "Maester Evelyn, send this letter to Sunsphere City. A Maester wearing a grey robe, a Maester chain hanging around his neck, and a little grey hair came out and bowed slightly. As you command." Although Maester Evelyn did not save John Connington, Viserys did not vent his anger on him. Some people will vent their anger on the Maester if they cannot cure the disease or fail to save the patient, but Viserys will not do that. With the medical level of this era, it is rare to be able to save a patient. Most of them will experience pain and then die. It is better not to save. The specific content of the letter written by Viserys was also very simple. He asked his father-in-law, who had lived in the Water Gardens for decades, to come to King's Landing in person and explain to him why this happened. Originally, Viserys had promised Tyrion that he would not do so, but the death of John Connington ignited his anger. He could no longer turn a blind eye to the tacit approval of the Sunspear City for this rebellion. Others may not know the current situation of Dorne, but for Viserys, who knows the past, present, and future, and knows the general direction of the world, and can see the essence from the surface, he knows the situation of Dorne very well. Prince Doran's methods are extremely clever, and he has absolute control over Dorne. In other words, the Skyreach rebellion would not have broken out without the tacit approval of the Sunspear City. Even if the Old Falcon forcibly launched a rebellion in order to evade legal sanctions, other families would not have the courage to join the rebellion without the tacit approval of the Sunspear City. The Martell family of Sunspear, his father-in-law whom he had never met, might want to take this opportunity to express his dissatisfaction with the Iron Throne, but he was very smart to completely stay out of the matter and only let some pawns charge. However, Viserys, who was furious, was also merciless. He directly burned all the pawns sent by Prince Doran to death in Sky City with a thunderous force. As a strong response, he slapped Prince Doran in the face. Perhaps as the mastermind behind the chess game, Prince Doran did not make any mistakes in his layout. Viserys' move to Dorne was an open conspiracy. All other parts of Westeros were reformed. Only Dorne was an exception, and it was bound to become the target of public criticism. And Prince Doran wanted to take the challenge and save Dorne, so he had to take an unconventional approach. From the perspective of the two opposing chess players, his move might not be wrong. But he was wrong in misjudging Viserys' determination to solve the Dorne problem and misjudging the time when the dragon would be dispatched. Who could have thought that the war in Skylanders had not started yet, but the dragon on the other side had already taken a step ahead and accurately controlled the time to fly from King's Landing to Dorne. After all, Viserys had opened the Eye of Heaven, and Prince Doran was just a mortal, so this game was unfair to him. And the main reason, including the two opponents on the chessboard, Viserys and Prince Doran did not expect the sudden change of the chess pieces. The heir of Sandston City named Gullion Corja raised his bow and arrow to avenge his brother, and suddenly shot John Connington with a cold arrow. And this arrow pierced John Connington's heart, and the Prime Minister of the Iron Throne who led the army to the expedition was shot and killed, causing Viserys' anger. These are things that Viserys and Prince Doran did not expect to happen in advance. Therefore, Viserys got angry and raised Skylanders to vent his anger. At the same time, he also killed the Corja family of Sandston City, the other family of Hellgate, and the Fowler family of Skylanders Pass Guard. Prince Doran was also slapped hard in the face. He had only two options. One was to launch a larger scale rebellion, putting his son and daughter in King's Landing in danger, but he could win the hearts of the Dornish nobles. The other was to obey Viserys' order, bow his head and admit defeat, and go to King's Landing to explain to the nobles in the throne room. This would save his two children in King's Landing, and prevent Dorne from continuing to fall into the risk of war, but the price was the loss of the loyalty of the Dornish nobles. After all, a lord who could not protect his vassals could not win the heartfelt support of the nobles. There was also the initiative of the next change. The Reach would continue to absorb refugees from Dorne with its own advantages, and Dorne would no longer be able to continue to provoke war. In the end, Dawn could only be forced to reform in order to save itself, and took the initiative to join the system of the empire and truly become a part of it rather than the semi-independent state it once was. After the letter was sent, Viserys personally escorted John Connington's coffin and flew to King's Landing on a dragon. Chapter 675 Attack. Viserys flew back to King's Landing, and the fleet on the other side of the narrow sea had already left me and arrived at the next destination, Tirosh. Tirosh is a port city, one of the 9 free trade cities. It is far away from the mainland and is located on a large island in the north of the Stepstone Islands. It is the closest trade city to the mainland of Westeros. I have been to Sunspear. I have also been to Tirosh. Asher, a Ironborn wearing a grey-black coarse cloth shirt with an unbuttoned chest and a scimitar tied around his waist, introduced it to Asher Greyjoy beside him as he walked. Tirosh is much larger than Sunspear. In front of him was a city full of hustle and bustle. The fleet of the Targaryen family docked at the port of Tirosh. The sailors and soldiers on the ship could move freely here for a short time and buy some supplies. There was also a Weeping Blood Tower at the port of Tirosh. The scale of Tirosh is much larger than Sunspear, but it is still far behind King's Landing. However, this island city has developed trade, and materials from all over the world will appear here, transit or flow in and out, so it is very lively. There are all kinds of people on the street, with various hair colors, skin colors, accents, and costumes from all over the world. Some are in groups of 3 or 5, and some are bargaining. And Asher and other foreigners walked on the street openly without attracting attention, because the open atmosphere here is very strong. In addition, Tiroshi also has a developed slave trade. Mercenaries, slaves, and lust gardens are very common in Tiroshi. Tiroshi was once a colony of the Valyrian Freehold, and later gained independence after the Doomsday. Asher Greyjoy of the Andals. In terms of politics, the ruler of Tiroshi is called the Great Lord. The Great Lord of Tiroshi is not hereditary, but elected through a series of bribes and threats, but the Tiroshi people think this is a very normal thing. How can a candidate who can't even bribe for elections be qualified to rule their city? Therefore, during the Battle of the 9 Copperplate Kings, the group of mercenaries, pirates, and merchants broke through Tirosh and supported the local wealthy businessman Silvertongue Agiddo Adris to become the ruler of Tirosh. After the defeat of the Battle of the 9 Copperplate Kings, Agiddo served as the ruler of Tirosh for a few years, and was eventually poisoned to death by his wife, and the system of Tirosh's Grand King was restored. However, Otten Adris, the youngest son of Silvertongue Agiddo Adris, was not liquidated. Instead, he gained the trust of the contemporary Grand King, and later became one of the governors of Me with the support of Tirosh. Today, in the Grand King's Palace of Tirosh, the contemporary Grand King of Tirosh sits in the center of the palace, holding a beautiful female slave in his arms, gently sniffing the fragrance of the beauty, while the female slave sits in his arms with a silly smile and blocks the Grand King's mouth with a grape. There were several slaves kneeling beside the Lord of Tiroshi. Some of them were holding fruit plates for him, some were massaging his feet, and another was acting as his translator. The Valyrian language spoken in Tiroshi was in serious conflict with the mainstream. It was a dialect of Valyrian that was heavily localized. The Lord of Tiroshi could not understand the common language, and Asher could not understand this dialect either. At this moment, the Lord of Tiroshi asked, and the translator standing beside him, wearing only coarse cloth clothes, with bare arms and a slave-marked tattooed on his cheek, spoke without hesitation. Asher Greyjoy of the Andals, my king has some questions to ask you. What is the purpose of your visit this time? How long do you plan to stay in Tiroshi? The Lord of Tiroshi's question seemed a little impolite, but it was very straightforward. For a region like Tiroshi, it is a place of peace and security, and there is no ambition to dominate. The only unreasonable thought is to claim the disputed land. That piece of land was once a prosperous area during the reign of Valyria, but now it has declined, but it still has a lot of population and mineral veins. Now that Me has withdrawn from the competition, only Tirosh and Lies are left to confront each other head-on, and Volantis has always intended to intervene in the issue of the disputed land. However, compared with the size of Tirosh and Lies, Volantis is a behemoth, so every time Volantis shows interest in the disputed land, the former two sisters will temporarily put down their wars and unite against the outside world. But now it's not just Volantis. Another even bigger behemoth next to the Three Sisters Kingdom has also turned its attention to the east and sent a fleet to visit, which can't help but make the world of the free trade cities nervous. The question of the Tirosh Lord is strictly speaking the first time that the world of the free trade cities has asked the Iron Throne for its intention. Me, who visited the first battle of the fleet, does not have this qualification. A puppet regime cannot represent the trade city states, let alone talk directly with the Iron Throne. I cannot refuse His Majesty's decree, nor can I guess his purpose. His Majesty received a request from the envoy of North Island to send troops to help Valyria's vassal states solve the pirate crisis. At the same time, he asked me to visit the city-states along the way to convey good neighborliness. We are friends, Lord. The Princess of the Iron Islands stood at the bottom of the steps with one hand on the hilt of the sword at her waist. She looked around and spoke loudly. Her answer was neither humble nor arrogant, and she was not at all nervous. Viserys sent Asha to visit because he saw her ability to take charge of things on her own. Asha is not like many girls in laced dresses. Not long after, Asha ended her diplomatic mission in the palace of Lord Tirosh. The Lord of Tirosh has a close relationship with Dawn, and the Lord himself has a close personal relationship with Prince Doran, so he also has a deep understanding of what happened in Westeros. Lord Tirosh also asked Asha about the reasons and intentions of Viserys' announcement of his accession to the throne of Valyria, and expressed his concerns. Because Tirosh was once one of Valyria's vassals, no one except themselves wants to see this great empire return to the world. However, Asha was still unaware of this matter and looked confused. Lord Tirosh learned the news in advance through hidden channels. Now Asha and her entourage rode on war horses to leave Lord Tirosh's palace and were slowly returning to the port. And by the way, they took a look at the customs and practices of Tirosh. But just as the two were riding their war horses passing through a small alley, a group of people suddenly flashed out, and they were suddenly blocked from the front and back. Kill her. Then the group of masked men in black did not communicate with Asha, but directly drew their weapons and pounced on her. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.